Hey there, tonight we're diving into the eyebrow-raising sexual escapades of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. Forget the romanticized tales. The truth is much kinkier than hieroglyphs let on. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. Diving headfirst into the sun-drenched sands of ancient Egypt, you'd think the lives of pharaohs were all about golden thrones, mysterious pyramids, and a penchant for eyeliner that even Cleopatra would envy. But hold on to your hieroglyphs, because beneath the glitz and glamour was a world of family dynamics that would make modern soap operas look like Sesame Street. At the heart of this peculiar royal lifestyle was the concept of divine status, a belief that pharaohs were not just rulers, but living gods among mere mortals. And what could possibly complement a divine ruler's life better than a family tree that twists and turns like a pretzel on steroids? First, let's unravel the illustrious mess that is the family lineage of Tutankhamun, affectionately known as King Tut. This young pharaoh, who ascended to the throne as a mere teenager around 1332 BCE, had a family history that was as tangled as a ball of yarn after a cat's playdate. Tut's parents, Akhenaten and probably his sister wife, yes, you read that right, were the pioneers of this whole keep it in the family business. If there was a royal family reunion, you'd be hard-pressed to figure out who brought the potato salad and who was just there for the drama. In the land of the Nile, marrying within the family wasn't just a quirky tradition, it was practically a royal requirement. The reasoning was as twisted as the practice itself. Divine blood was believed to be so pure and potent that it needed to be preserved at all costs. Thus, brother-sister marriages among royals were as common as sand grains in the desert. Akhenaten, Tutankhamun's father, was a bit of a maverick himself. He shook up the Egyptian religious landscape by promoting the worship of a single god, Aten, and might have thought, why not shake up the family tree while I'm at it? Now, before you start thinking the pharaohs were just a bunch of incestuous eccentrics, consider the political chess game at play. Marrying within the family ensured that power stayed centralized, and the divine aura of the pharaoh remained untainted by the commoner's touch. It was a strategic move, albeit one that led to all sorts of genetic hiccups. And while the ancient Egyptians might not have had the tools to understand DNA, they certainly noticed when royal offspring came out with more than a fair share of health issues. Take Tutankhamun again, the poster child for the pitfalls of familial frolics. Modern science has revealed that King Tut suffered from a range of ailments, including a clubfoot and a cleft palate, likely due to generations of inbreeding. His reign was short, lasting only a decade, and his premature death at around 18 years old remains shrouded in mystery. Was it a chariot accident, as some theories suggest, or the result of a more sinister palace plot? Either way, his family history was undoubtedly a contributing factor to his fragile health. When it comes to divine incest, though, Akhenaten might have been the poster boy for breaking the mold. His revolutionary religious ideas were matched only by his unconventional family life. He married Nefertiti, who was either his cousin or niece. The records are foggy, much like the Cairo skyline on a dusty day, and together they had 6 daughters. The jury's still out on whether this family was more dysfunctional than divine, but considering Akhenaten's penchant for shaking things up, it's not a stretch to imagine royal dinners were anything but ordinary. But why stop at mere sibling marriages when you could turn the entire family tree into a convoluted knot? The pharaoh's obsession with keeping their lineage pure often led to marriages between uncles and nieces, aunts and nephews, and any other combination that would make a geneticist wince. Sure, it sounds like the setup for a scandalous reality TV show, but back then, it was the norm. And let's be honest, the pharaohs probably would have killed it on Bravo. In an Egypt where the divine right to rule was stronger than the annual Nile flood, such practices weren't just accepted, they were expected. The pharaohs were seen as intermediaries between the gods and the people, and their family dynamics were just another way of maintaining that celestial connection. The reality, however, was a little less godly and a little more tangled. This divine status wasn't just a matter of religious belief. It was a powerful political tool. By presenting themselves as living gods, pharaohs could command both respect and fear in equal measure. It was a way of solidifying their rule and ensuring obedience, all while engaging in family practices that were, let's say, less than conventional. In a world where bloodlines were everything, the pharaohs took the motto, family first, to a whole new level. And while some might romanticize these ancient rulers as wise and benevolent leaders, their personal lives tell a different, more complex story. The divine incest wasn't just about maintaining power. It was also about the sheer belief in the sanctity of their bloodline. It's a fascinating glimpse into a world where the lines between divinity and humanity were as blurred as the desert mirage. So, next time you find yourself marveling at the majestic statues and intricate hieroglyphs, remember the tangled web of family affairs that lay beneath those stone facades. The pharaohs may have been seen as gods on earth, but their family trees were anything but heavenly. They were a mix of strategy, belief, and a dash of chaos that would make even the most seasoned genealogist break a sweat. In the end, the divine status of the pharaohs led to practices that were as perplexing as they were pragmatic, leaving a legacy that's as intriguing as it is unsettling. And speaking of divine status, let's dive into the alluringly bizarre world of pharaohs and their fertility rituals, a heady cocktail of mysticism, public spectacle, and just a hint of awkwardness. You see, the pharaohs weren't just content with being living gods. They wanted to make sure everyone knew it. And what better way to demonstrate divine favor than by performing fertility rituals that were as public as they were peculiar? Enter the annual Nile flood ceremony, a tradition that combined religious fervor with a splash of ancient theater. Now, before you start picturing a polite gathering by the riverside, let's set the scene. The Nile was Egypt's lifeline, its annual floodwaters transforming arid desert into fertile farmland, a process as essential as Wi-Fi in a coffee shop today. The pharaoh, as the divine intermediary, was believed to have a direct heartline to the gods, ensuring the flood's timely arrival. And just to make sure the gods got the memo, these fertility rituals often involved, shall we say, a public performance. One of the more eye-catching events was the Festival of Min, a fertility rite that centered around the god Min, who was often depicted with an exaggerated endowment. The pharaoh, channeling his inner showman, would partake in ceremonial acts designed to ensure the Nile's life-giving flood. And yes, these acts were sometimes as literal as they were symbolic. Imagine the modern equivalent of a CEO doing a rain dance in Times Square, except with a lot less clothing and a lot more responsibility. This wasn't just about putting on a show. It was a statement of power and divine favor. The pharaoh's participation in these rituals reinforced their role as the essential link between the celestial and the terrestrial. It was a performance that carried with it the weight of the kingdom's prosperity. After all, if the Nile failed to flood, it wasn't just a bad day for agriculture. It was a potential crisis for the entire civilization. As with many things in ancient Egypt, there was an economic angle too. A successful flood meant bountiful crops, which translated into taxes paid in grain, wine, and other goods. This wasn't just a matter of spiritual duty. It was an economic necessity. The pharaoh's ability to command the floods was directly linked to the wealth and stability of their reign. Talk about performance pressure. And let's not forget the inscriptions and records that give us a peek into these grand events. Take the Hymn to the Nile, an ancient text that praises the river's vital role in Egyptian life. It paints a picture of the Nile as a divine gift, one that brought prosperity and abundance. It's a romantic image, sure, but also a reminder of just how intertwined religion and survival were in this ancient culture. These rituals, while baffling to our modern sensibilities, were a cornerstone of the pharaoh's divine image. They served to reinforce the idea that the pharaoh was not just a ruler, but a god-king whose very existence ensured the land's fertility. It's a concept that's both fascinating and a little unsettling, a reminder of how power, belief, and spectacle were interwoven in the tapestry of ancient Egyptian society. But let's not get too swept up in the romance of it all. The reality was that these rituals were a form of political theater, a way to maintain control and project an image of divine authority. They reinforced the social hierarchy, keeping the pharaoh at the top while ensuring that the populace remained in awe and perhaps a bit wary of their god-like ruler. The inscriptions and hieroglyphs that survive today are a testament to this blending of power and piety. They show us a world where the lines between the divine and the mundane were as fluid as the Nile itself. A world where the pharaoh was both a man and a god, tasked with ensuring the prosperity of his people through rituals that seem as strange to us as they were sacred to them. So next time you find yourself pondering the grandeur of ancient Egypt, remember that behind those towering monuments and intricate hieroglyphs was a society deeply committed to maintaining the balance between earth and sky. The pharaohs, with their fertility rituals and divine status, were at the heart of this cosmic dance, a position that was as precarious as it was powerful. And as the Nile ebbed and flowed, so too did the fortunes of those who dared to call themselves gods on earth. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to explore in this saga of sand, power, and divine intrigue. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of the pharaoh's storied reign, and trust me, the best, or weirdest, is yet to come. And speaking of the pharaoh's cosmic dance, let's shimmy over to another intriguing aspect of their world, the scandalous realm of royal concubines and the infamous harem politics. If you thought palace intrigue was solely the domain of medieval courts or modern tabloid fodder, think again. Ancient Egypt had its own version of the real housewives, except the stakes were a bit higher, like life or death higher. Picture a harem not just as a collection of silk-draped women lounging around, but as a microcosm of political strategy and economic investment. The pharaoh's harem wasn't merely about indulging in the pleasures of the flesh. It was a complex institution that required meticulous management and resources. Think of it as the ancient world's answer to a celebrity entourage, complete with all the drama, but with the added twist of potential assassination plots. First off, let's dive into some numbers. Maintaining a harem was no small feat. The pharaoh's entourage could include hundreds of women, ranging from wives to concubines to servants. And this wasn't just a matter of buying a few extra loaves of bread for dinner. Each member of the harem required sustenance, clothing, and the occasional bling to keep up appearances. We're talking about a socio-economic setup that could rival a small city-state. It's estimated that the cost of maintaining a pharaoh's harem could run into the equivalent of millions of modern dollars annually. Imagine managing the logistics of feeding and clothing hundreds of people, not to mention keeping them all happy. It was a full-time job that required an army of administrators. The harem was more than just a collection of women. It was a political chessboard. The alliances formed within its walls could make or break a pharaoh's reign. Each concubine or wife brought with her a network of familial ties and potential alliances. Marrying the daughter of a neighboring ruler might secure a peace treaty, while the favor of a powerful concubine could ensure the loyalty of an influential faction. The stakes were high, and the competition fierce. Forget about Instagram likes. This was about securing the future of a dynasty. And let's not sugarcoat things. Where there was power, there was paranoia. The harem was a hotbed of intrigue, with potential rivals plotting for their children's ascension or their own advancement. The notion that a pharaoh's untimely demise could be orchestrated by a disgruntled concubine isn't just the stuff of legend. The infamous tale of Ramses Roman III, who met his end in the harem conspiracy, is a prime example. In 1155 BCE, a plot led by one of his lesser wives, Ti, resulted in his assassination. She aimed to place her son, Pentoa, on the throne, a plan that reads like a precursor to every royal coup d'etat in history. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well for the conspirators, but it certainly left a mark on the annals of history. Maintaining a harem wasn't just about the economics or politics, it was a statement of power. A large harem signified wealth and influence, much like a billionaire's yacht collection today. It was a visual representation of the pharaoh's dominance, a living testament to his ability to support and control such a vast network of dependents. But unlike a yacht, a harem could think, scheme, and sometimes bite back. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're here. The romanticized vision of a harem as a bejeweled oasis of leisure and luxury is, well, a bit of a stretch. Sure, there were moments of opulence, but life in the harem wasn't all gilded cages and perfumed gardens. The women within its walls lived under constant scrutiny, their movements and interactions monitored by a cadre of overseers. Privacy was a luxury, and freedom was often an illusion. It was less Arabian Nights fantasy and more a high-stakes game of survival. In terms of economic impact, the harem was a mini-economy unto itself. The demand for goods, from food to textiles, created jobs and stimulated trade. Artisans, merchants, and farmers all played a part in keeping the harem running smoothly. And let's not forget the harem's role in diplomacy. Through strategic marriages, the pharaoh could forge alliances and secure resources, extending his influence far beyond Egypt's borders. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required as much skill in negotiation as in governance. So, while the opulence of a royal harem might capture the imagination, the reality was a complex web of political maneuvering, economic necessity, and social dynamics. The harem was as much a part of the pharaoh's power structure as the pyramids themselves, a testament to the intricacies of ruling an ancient empire. And with that, let's leave the harem's shadowy corridors behind for now, as our journey through the enigmatic world of ancient Egypt continues. We've only begun to peel back the layers of this fascinating civilization, and trust me, the sands of time have plenty more secrets to reveal. Stay tuned for more tales of power, intrigue, and the ever-compelling dance between myth and reality. Speaking of secrets cloaked in the sands of time, let's dive headfirst into the world of ancient Egyptian love potions and aphrodisiacs, a realm where the lines between magic and medicine were as blurred as a desert mirage. Now, if you've ever thought that ancient Egyptians had a secret recipe for eternal passion, you're not alone. But before you get too excited about an ancient aphrodisiac that might rival modern pharmaceuticals, let's separate fact from fiction with a little humor and a lot of history. First off, let's talk about what these ancient love brews actually were. Imagine a concoction as exotic as it was questionable, with ingredients that ranged from the mundane to the downright bizarre. According to ancient texts and archaeological evidence, these potions often included honey, wine, and various herbs. Pretty standard fare. But things got a little weirder with the addition of ingredients like crocodile dung and hippo fat. Yep, you heard that right. Nothing says romance like a whiff of Nile crocodile. The ancient Egyptians took their potion-making seriously. They believed that these brews could ignite passion or inspire fidelity, much like a divine spark from the gods. And while it's tempting to romanticize these efforts as the original Cupid's arrows, the reality is a bit more, let's say, aromatic. After all, when your love potion smells like the local zoo, you're probably not going to attract the right kind of attention. But hey, at least they were trying. Let's debunk the effectiveness of these potions with a dose of modern science. Spoiler alert, most of these concoctions were about as effective as a placebo on a bad day. While honey and wine might set the mood, the other ingredients were more likely to send you running for the nearest sand dune. Archaeological evidence suggests that the love potion market was less about genuine results and more about the allure of hope. After all, when you're a pharaoh juggling divine duties, harem politics, and international diplomacy, a little magical boost probably seemed like a good idea. Speaking of boosts, let's talk about the ancient equivalent of Viagra. In their quest for, shall we say, enhanced performance, the Egyptians turned to some rather unorthodox remedies. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical text dating back to around 1550 BCE, offers a recipe for a supposed aphrodisiac involving a mixture of ground carob, garlic, and honey. While we can't confirm the results, it's safe to say that these ingredients might have left a bit to be desired in terms of effectiveness or taste. The ancient Egyptians' belief in the power of love potions wasn't entirely misplaced, though. In a society where magic and medicine were intertwined, the psychological impact of these concoctions was significant. The placebo effect is a powerful thing, and if believing that a potion would work made it so, then who are we to argue? It's a bit like the modern obsession with superfoods. Sometimes it's the belief, rather than the ingredient, that makes the difference. But let's not get too caught up in the romance of it all. The economic context of these potions is worth noting. Crafting a love potion wasn't just about mixing a few herbs. It was an enterprise involving farmers, traders, and skilled potion makers. The demand for exotic ingredients stimulated trade, and the market for these brews was a testament to the Egyptians' willingness to invest in a little magical intervention. It's a reminder that the ancient world was a bustling hub of commerce, where even the most whimsical desires had their price. And while the allure of these potions might have been as intoxicating as the wine they were mixed with, the reality is a bit less enchanting. The notion that a few drops of a magical brew could solve all romantic woes is a myth as persistent as the idea that ancient Egyptians spent all day lounging under palm trees. The truth is, love and relationships were as complex then as they are today. No potion could simplify the tangled web of human emotions. As we sift through the sands of time, it's clear that the ancient Egyptians' fascination with love potions was as much about hope as it was about magic. These brews were a testament to the enduring human desire for connection, passion, and the occasional miracle. They remind us that even in a world where pharaohs ruled as living gods, the mysteries of the heart were as elusive as ever. So, as we continue our journey through the fascinating world of ancient Egypt, remember that behind every myth lies a kernel of truth, and behind every potion, a story worth telling. The Egyptians' pursuit of love and loyalty through these potions is a testament to their belief in the power of the unseen, a belief that, despite the passage of millennia, still resonates with us today. And speaking of resonance, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the world of the pharaohs and their quest for immortality. The next chapter in our saga promises more intrigue, mystery, and a touch of the bizarre. After all, when it comes to ancient Egypt, the past is always present, and the secrets of the Nile are waiting to be uncovered. As the ancient Egyptians pursued their quest for immortality, they inadvertently left us with a legacy that's as enigmatic as the Sphinx's smile, and as twisted as a pharaoh's family tree. These long-gone rulers, with their royal quirks and divine aspirations, have carved a niche in history that's both fascinating and, well, a tad unsettling. Let's unravel this legacy and see how it's been spun into tales that captivate and confuse us, even millennia later. The romanticized version of ancient Egypt, the one that Hollywood loves to dust off and parade on the silver screen, is a land of golden splendor, where the pharaohs are wise sages wielding power with grace. But let's face it, the reality was a bit more complex. Take the classic image of the pharaoh as a benevolent god king. Sure, they were seen as divine intermediaries, but beneath the veneer of deity, they were humans playing a high-stakes game of thrones. Think less Morgan Freeman narrating a documentary about ancient wisdom, and more Machiavelli with a penchant for eyeliner. In the realm of pop culture, the pharaoh's divine status often gets top billing, while the less glamorous details, like incestuous family dynamics or harems that would make a soap opera blush, are conveniently glossed over. It's as if we've collectively decided to swipe left on the uncomfortable bits, opting instead for a sanitized version that fits neatly into our romantic notions of the past. Hollywood, with its penchant for epic narratives and impossibly attractive leads, has a knack for cherry-picking history's greatest hits. The result? A version of ancient Egypt that's more akin to a theme park attraction than a real civilization. We've got the pyramids, the pharaohs, and the occasional mummy's curse. But where's the gritty reality of political intrigue and economic necessity? It's like telling the story of the Titanic and skipping straight to the romantic sunset scene, conveniently ignoring the icy aftermath. But let's not be too hard on the storytellers. After all, the allure of ancient Egypt is undeniable, and there's something to be said for a narrative that captures our imagination. Yet, as we dig deeper into the sand, it's crucial to remember that the reality was a bit messier. A civilization built on a foundation of divine authority, economic acumen, and a sprinkle of chaos that would make even the most seasoned ruler break a sweat. The pharaoh's divine mystique was more than just a title. It was a shrewd political move that kept the wheels of power turning. By presenting themselves as living gods, they maintained control over both the land and its people. This divine status was a double-edged sword, granting them unparalleled authority while also shackling them to expectations that were, quite literally, out of this world. The challenges of ruling weren't just about managing resources or fending off invaders. It was about keeping up the celestial charade. And let's not forget the economic dimension. The grandeur of ancient Egypt wasn't just about divine favor. It was about cold, hard resources. The pharaoh's ability to command the Nile's bounty was as much a testament to their administrative prowess as it was to their spiritual status. Behind every monumental achievement, from the towering pyramids to the sprawling temples, was a complex web of trade, labor, and logistics. It was a civilization that thrived on the intersection of faith and finance, where the divine right to rule was balanced against the very earthly need to pay the builders. The legacy of these practices, while strange, was integral to the pharaohs' divine mystique. They left us with a tapestry woven from threads of ambition, belief, and the occasional scandal, threads that continue to unravel in our collective consciousness. It's a legacy that beckons us with whispers of grandeur, even as it warns us of the pitfalls of power unchecked. In the end, the pharaoh's world was a place where myth and reality danced an intricate tango, leaving us with stories that are as captivating as they are cautionary. It's a reminder that history is never just black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of human experience, filled with shades of complexity that defy easy categorization. So, as we bid farewell to the sands of ancient Egypt, let's carry with us the lessons of a civilization that dared to dream big despite its flaws. The tales of the pharaohs may be shrouded in mystery, but they offer us a mirror to our own world, a world where power, belief, and the quest for immortality continue to shape our destinies. And as we close this chapter, remember, history has a way of repeating itself, often with a sense of humor that only time can appreciate. Stay curious, stay critical, and never stop questioning the stories we tell about the past. After all, the sands of time have a way of shifting, revealing new truths with every turn of the tide. Nikolaus Copernicus entered the world on February 19, 1473, in Torun, Poland, a city not exactly bustling with astronomical ambition, but certainly rich with merchants, markets, and a good dose of medieval drama. His family was part of this vibrant trade scene. His father, also named Nikolaus, was a successful merchant. Unfortunately, in the cutthroat world of medieval commerce, success had a short shelf life. By the time young Copernicus was 10, his father had shuffled off this mortal coil, leaving behind a family and a tangled web of economic responsibilities. Enter Uncle Lucas Watson-Road, the ultimate medieval benefactor. If you thought your uncle was cool because he let you drive his car, imagine having an uncle who bankrolled your entire education. Lucas was not just any guardian. He was the Bishop of Warmia, wielding influence like a Renaissance opera, dishing out opportunities instead of cars. With money and power to spare, he took young Nikolaus under his wing, setting the stage for one of the best educational investments in cosmic history. Now, let's talk about Copernicus's educational journey, because it was nothing short of a Renaissance buffet. If you think juggling a double major sounds tough, Copernicus was out here sampling courses like a kid at an all-you-can-eat knowledge buffet. His academic escapades began at the University of Krakow in 1491, where he didn't just study astronomy, but also mathematics and philosophy, because why not? It was the Renaissance, after all. An era when people dabbled in everything like it was a Pinterest board come to life. After a few years of this intellectual smorgasbord, Copernicus headed to Italy, the land of pasta, popes, and potential. He enrolled at the University of Bologna in 1496, where he studied canon law. You might wonder why the future father of heliocentrism was diving into legal codes instead of stars. The truth is, it was a pragmatic move. Canon law meant job security, and everyone has to pay the bills, even future scientific revolutionaries. Besides, Uncle Lucas had his eye on a church career for his protege, and what Uncle Lucas wanted, Uncle Lucas usually got. In Bologna, Copernicus didn't just bury his nose in law books. He also mingled with the intellectual crowd, meeting astronomer Domenico Maria Novara. This mentorship became pivotal, like a cosmic buddy movie where the duo questioned the Ptolemaic system under the moonlit Italian sky. It's said that Copernicus assisted Novara in observations, learning the ropes of celestial charting while likely wondering why everyone thought the Earth was the center of the universe. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. As if law and astronomy weren't enough, Copernicus also dipped his toes into medicine. Now, before you start picturing him as a Renaissance Doogie Howser, let's be clear. Medical knowledge back then was more about balancing humors and less about understanding germs. But medicine was another practical skill, way to keep bread on the table. He studied at the University of Padua, where the dissection of human bodies was just becoming a thing, and where he learned to treat the ailments of the day, from the plague to the common cold, with remedies that were often more medieval than modern. By the time Copernicus returned to Poland in 1503, he was a well-rounded scholar with more degrees than a thermometer. He had his canon law degree from Ferrara, which, again, was less about a passion for church law and more about not wanting to live in a medieval cardboard box. It's important to remember that in the 16th century, education was a luxury, not a right, and Copernicus was fortunate to have both opportunity and support, a rare cosmic alignment in itself. Back in Poland, Copernicus settled into a role that combined his many talents. He served as a canon in Framborg, a position that came with a steady income and a comfortable residence, allowing him the freedom to pursue his astronomical interests without the pesky problem of financial instability. And while it sounds like a cushy gig, the truth is, it was a strategic move that offered him the stability to eventually upend the universe, or at least humanity's understanding of it. So, here's the thing. While Copernicus was laying the groundwork for his revolutionary astronomical theories, he was also navigating the complexities of a life that demanded more than stargazing. Between balancing church duties and medical side gigs, he was the ultimate multitasker of his day, proving that you can indeed shoot for the stars while keeping your feet firmly planted on Earth. Or at least, until he figured out that Earth wasn't the center of the universe. But that's a story for another day. So, Copernicus was juggling more roles than a Renaissance juggler at a fair, an image fitting for someone whose life was a three-ring circus of responsibilities. Let's start with his job as a church administrator. You might think of this as a cushy gig, sitting in a drafty office, rubber-stamping documents, and enjoying the occasional goblet of wine. But honestly, being a canon in Framborg was more like managing a celestial daycare. He was responsible for administering church property, settling disputes, and making sure the ecclesiastical machine ran smoothly. Picture him donning his churchly robes, quill in hand, while mentally mapping the solar system. Now, how does one reconcile the duties of a churchman with a burning urge to rewrite the cosmos? Carefully, and with a good sense of humor. Copernicus was like a one-man band, playing the organ of church duties by day and strumming the lyre of astronomy by night. His astronomical work was a bit like the secret life of pets. Unbeknownst to his clerical colleagues, he was quietly revolutionizing mankind's understanding of the universe. His evenings were filled with scribbles and star charts, proving that the sun, not the Earth, was the center of our planetary neighborhood, a revelation that would later shake the foundations of astronomy. But let's not forget Copernicus's surprising foray into the world of economics. Yes, before Bitcoin and blockchain, there was Copernicus with his monetary reform ideas. In 1517, he penned a treatise, Monety-Cudendi Ratio, the theory of money, with thoughts that were as fresh as a newly minted coin. Here's the kicker. Copernicus proposed what we now know as Gresham's law, which states that bad money drives out good. In layman's terms, if you have two forms of currency in circulation, people will hoard the good and spend the bad. It was a concept that seemed as radical then as it is intuitive now. Talk about a guy who could see the future. The economic scene in Copernicus's time was a tangled web of coins with different values, much like trying to buy a coffee with a mix of monopoly money and actual cash. He advocated for a unified currency system to stabilize the economy, a revolutionary idea that, much like his heliocentric theory, was ahead of its time. In a world where you couldn't just Venmo your way out of a financial pickle, Copernicus's insights were as valuable as a chest full of gold ducats. Amidst all these mind-bending ideas, Copernicus's role as a physician kept him grounded, literally, with his feet firmly planted on Earth. His medical practice was more about practicality than passion, treating everything from the common cold to the plague, often with remedies that were more medieval than modern. It was a time when the four humors dictated health, and leeches were a doctor's best friend. Yet, Copernicus managed to navigate these murky waters with a steady hand, all while moonlighting as an economic and astronomical pioneer. In this whirlwind of roles, you might wonder how Copernicus managed to keep his sanity. Perhaps it was his sense of humor that kept him going, or the quiet joy of knowing he was onto something big, something that would someday make textbooks and YouTube explainer videos. Imagine him chuckling to himself as he balanced the debits and credits of the church's accounts, knowing that soon enough he'd be blowing the world's mind with his radical ideas about the universe. The church, the stars, and the economy. Copernicus was the ultimate Renaissance multitasker, straddling worlds that seemed irreconcilable. His ability to switch between these roles was nothing short of a high-wire act. It's as if he was living in two different centuries, one foot in the medieval past and the other stepping boldly into a future that was just beginning to take shape. His life was a testament to the power of intellectual curiosity, proving that even in a time of rigid social structures and limited opportunities, a mind as keen as his could transcend the boundaries of its era. Copernicus's story is a reminder that sometimes the biggest revolutions start quietly, in the mind of a single person juggling more hats than even the most ambitious of medieval fashionistas. Now, about that little cosmic conundrum Copernicus was cooking up, while his daytime gig involved keeping Framborg's ecclesiastical gears turning by night. He was tinkering with a theory that would eventually give the entire universe a makeover. Enter the heliocentric model, a revolutionary idea that dared to suggest the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Instead, Copernicus proposed that the sun was the real star of the show, literally and figuratively. This wasn't just some wild guess made over a glass of mead. No, Copernicus put in the hard yards, meticulously observing the heavens with the kind of patience that would make a monk jealous. He didn't have telescopes. Those wouldn't come along until Galileo's time, so he relied on the naked eye, a few rudimentary tools, and a hefty dose of mathematical wizardry. Armed with these, he embarked on a quest that was as painstaking as it was groundbreaking. Copernicus's magnum opus, De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, try saying that 3 times fast, was the fruit of this labor. Completed in 1543, this hefty tome was the equivalent of dropping a scientific bombshell in the middle of medieval Europe. In it, he detailed his heliocentric model with a series of complex calculations and observations that left no celestial stone unturned. It was a work that spanned years, and the dedication shows. Each page practically radiates with the man's passion for the stars. Here's where things get a bit ironic. While Copernicus was busy rewriting the cosmic order, his masterpiece didn't exactly hit the bestseller list upon release. In fact, it was published the same year he died, which means he missed out on the initial reception. A mixed bag of polite nods and skeptical eyebrow raises. Imagine pouring your life into a work only to have it released when you're too busy pushing up daisies to bask in its glory. It's the kind of cosmic irony that even Shakespeare couldn't dream up. The initial reception of De Revolutionibus was less of a standing ovation and more of a polite golf clap. You see, medieval Europe was still cozying up to the Ptolemaic system, where Earth was the center of everything, and the heavens revolved around us like an elaborate celestial dance. To say Copernicus's ideas were a tough sell is an understatement. His heliocentric model was met with more skepticism than a medieval alchemist at a modern science fair. But why, you ask, was this revolutionary idea met with such tepid enthusiasm? Well, it's all about context, baby. The 16th century was a time when the church held sway over more than just Sunday sermons. The idea of Earth being the center of God's creation was deeply ingrained in the religious and philosophical fabric of the time. Copernicus's sun-centered universe was seen as a challenge to this divine order, and that kind of challenge didn't exactly get you a round of applause at the Vatican. It didn't help that De Revolutionibus was chock full of dense mathematical proofs and complex astronomical jargon. It was the kind of bedtime reading that would put even the most dedicated scholar to sleep. For the average Joe of the 16th century, it was a bit like trying to decipher a technical manual for a spaceship, written in Latin, no less. Let's be honest, Copernicus wasn't exactly writing for the masses. Despite the lukewarm initial reception, Copernicus's work slowly began to gain traction among the intellectual elite. It was like a slow-burning candle in the dark corridors of scientific inquiry, gradually illuminating the path for future astronomers. Over time, his ideas would inspire the likes of Kepler and Galileo, who would take the heliocentric model and run with it, revolutionizing our understanding of the universe in the process. Yet, back in Copernicus's day, the man himself might have been more of an unsung hero than a celebrated revolutionary. His heliocentric model was a seed planted in the fertile soil of Renaissance thought. one that would eventually grow into the towering tree of modern astronomy. It's a testament to the power of a single idea to outlive its creator and transform the world. In the end, Copernicus's legacy is a reminder that sometimes the stars of today were born in the quiet, painstaking work of yesterday. His heliocentric model didn't just change our place in the universe, it redefined it. And while Copernicus didn't live to see his ideas take hold, his work laid the groundwork for a new era of scientific discovery, proving that even the most radical ideas can find their place in the sun, given enough time and the right minds to nurture them. So, the next time you look up at the night sky, remember Copernicus, the man who dared to move the Earth and, in doing so, changed the way we see the universe. His story is a testament to the power of curiosity and the enduring impact of those who dare to question the status quo. And as we continue to explore the cosmos, one can't help but wonder what other revolutionary ideas are waiting to be discovered in the vast, star-studded expanse above. And speaking of star-studded expanses, let's dive into how Copernicus's heliocentric model sent shockwaves through the scientific community, or rather, how it took its sweet time to do so. Imagine dropping a pebble in a pond and waiting for the ripples to reach the shore. That's pretty much how it went down with Copernicus's revolutionary ideas. It wasn't exactly a lightning bolt moment, more like a slow-burning fuse that took a century to light the fireworks. First off, let's talk about the scientific community of the time. We're not dealing with a bustling hive of Twitter-happy scientists eager to jump on the latest trend. Oh no. Back in the 1500, scholars were few and far between, scattered across Europe like raisins in a medieval fruitcake. And communication, let's just say it was slower than a snail on a lazy Sunday. There were no email blasts or viral TikToks to spread the word. Instead, ideas traveled via handwritten letters, word of mouth, and the occasional book, if you were lucky enough to stumble upon one. So, when De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium hit the scene in 1543, it didn't exactly fly off the shelves. It was more of a sleeper hit, the kind of book that gathered dust in the back of a library until the right intellectual stumbled upon it. And even then, it faced an uphill battle. You see, Copernicus's heliocentric model was like a foreign language to most scholars, a tongue-twister of astronomical jargon wrapped in a Latin cloak. It wasn't exactly light reading, more like the medieval equivalent of tackling war and peace on a rainy afternoon. Now, here's the kicker. Despite the slow uptake, Copernicus's ideas eventually caught the attention of some big names. Enter Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei, the dynamic duo of the scientific revolution. These guys were like the Batman and Robin of their day, swooping in to champion the heliocentric model and give it the boost it desperately needed. Kepler, with his laws of planetary motion, provided the mathematical backbone, while Galileo, with his trusty telescope, offered observational support. Together, they turned Copernicus's theory from a whisper in the wind to a full-blown scientific doctrine. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't a smooth ride. Copernicus's model faced more skepticism than a conspiracy theory at a fact-checking convention. The idea that Earth wasn't the universe's VIP was a tough pill to swallow. Folks were so used to being the center of attention, literally, that the thought of orbiting the sun was downright unsettling. It's like telling a die-hard fan that their sports team isn't the greatest of all time. Cue the outrage and disbelief. And speaking of disbelief, let's unravel one of the biggest myths surrounding Copernicus, his supposed fear of persecution. Legend has it that he was so terrified of the church's wrath that he kept his heliocentric model under wraps until his deathbed. It's a romantic tale, sure, but the reality is a bit more mundane. The truth is, Copernicus was more worried about scholarly critique than a papal smackdown. He was a meticulous man, concerned with getting his calculations spot on before unleashing them on the world. It was less about fear and more about being a perfectionist. Now, don't get me wrong. There were risks involved. The church wasn't exactly handing out gold stars for revolutionary ideas that threatened its geocentric worldview. But in Copernicus's lifetime, the church was more focused on squashing Protestant reformers than policing astronomy. It wasn't until later, with Galileo's trial in 1633, that the church really brought the hammer down on heliocentrism. So, while the threat of persecution loomed in the background, it wasn't the immediate danger that romantic myths suggest. Of course, that didn't stop Copernicus's contemporaries from having a field day with his ideas. Imagine a bunch of scholars squinting at his complex diagrams, scratching their heads, and muttering, "Are you sure about this?" The misunderstandings were hilarious, if not a tad tragic. Some folks thought Copernicus was suggesting the sun revolved around the Earth in some bizarre cosmic tango, while others dismissed his model as pure fantasy, right up there with dragons and unicorns. It's worth noting that Copernicus wasn't some lone wolf crying in the wilderness. He had a few allies who saw the potential in his work. One of his early supporters was Georg Joachim Rheticus, young mathematician who became a pivotal figure in bringing Copernicus's ideas to the fore. Rheticus was like Copernicus's hype man, singing the praises of heliocentrism and working tirelessly to get De Revolutionibus published. Without him, Copernicus's work might have languished in obscurity for even longer. Yet, despite these efforts, the heliocentric model remained a hard sell. It required a paradigm shift, a complete rethinking of humanity's place in the cosmos. And let's face it, people aren't always keen on change, especially when it challenges the fundamental beliefs that underpin their understanding of the universe. For many, the idea that Earth was just another planet, spinning around the sun like a cosmic carousel, was as unsettling as it was groundbreaking. Over time, however, Copernicus's ideas began to take root, thanks in large part to the tireless work of those who followed in his footsteps. It was a gradual process, like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. With each passing decade, more scholars began to embrace the heliocentric model, and by the time we hit the 17th century, it was gaining serious traction. The diffusion of Copernicus's ideas was like a game of telephone, with each scholar adding their own twist to the tale. Some embraced the model wholeheartedly, while others cherry-picked elements that suited their needs. It was a messy, organic process, but one that ultimately led to a seismic shift in our understanding of the universe. As we inch closer to the end of this cosmic journey, it's clear that Copernicus's impact on the scientific community was profound, even if it took a while to fully manifest. His heliocentric model laid the groundwork for a new era of astronomical exploration, challenging us to look beyond our own little corner of the cosmos and see the bigger picture. It was a revolution that unfolded slowly, but one that would change the course of history forever. And so, as we leave Copernicus on the brink of scientific immortality, it's important to remember that his story is far from over. The reverberations of his work continue to echo through the ages, inspiring generations of astronomers, scientists, and dreamers to reach for the stars. In the grand tapestry of history, Copernicus is a thread that binds us to a time when the universe was just beginning to reveal its secrets, a reminder that sometimes the most profound discoveries are born from the quiet persistence of a curious mind. Now, let's take a moment to ponder the grand irony of it all. Copernicus, the man who spent his nights unweaving the celestial tapestry of the heavens, never lived to see his ideas ignite the intellectual bonfire they eventually became. It's one of history's little jokes, really. Here was a man who quietly, methodically, and dare I say, stubbornly, recalibrated humanity's view of the cosmos, only to check out of the cosmic hotel before his theory checked in with the public. It's like planting a tree and never getting to sit in its shade. Copernicus's legacy is a bit like the ultimate sleeper hit, one of those cult classics that only gets its due appreciation long after the credits have rolled. You see, while his De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium didn't exactly top the 16th century charts, it was the intellectual mixtape that future giants would remix and amplify. Galileo, with his telescopic revelations, and Kepler, with his mathematical wizardry, took Copernicus's heliocentric model and gave it the rock star treatment it deserved. But let's not forget that Copernicus was kind of a rock star himself, in his own understated way. Sure, he didn't have the flamboyant flair of a Galileo or the dramatic flair of a Kepler, but he was the quiet genius who set the stage for their headlining acts. Imagine a world where your groundbreaking work is the warm-up for history's main event. That was Copernicus, the warm-up act for a cosmic revolution. It's easy to romanticize Copernicus as a solitary genius, toiling away in obscurity, but the truth is a bit more bureaucratic. Behind every great scholar of the Renaissance, there's usually a stack of paperwork and a patron with deep pockets. Copernicus had both. His position as a canon provided not just financial stability, but also the precious commodity of time. Time to ponder the heavens when he wasn't busy balancing the books or treating medieval maladies. He was the ultimate multitasker, seamlessly blending the sacred with the scientific, like a Renaissance DJ mixing Gregorian chants with celestial beats. And yet, it's this very duality that makes Copernicus's story so compelling. He was a man of the cloth, deeply embedded in the ecclesiastical world, and yet he dared to suggest a cosmos where the earth was not the star of the show. In a world where the church was more powerful than a medieval king, this was the intellectual equivalent of pulling the tablecloth from under the dinner service without spilling a drop. It's a testament to his intellectual bravery that he pursued his heliocentric vision, even when it meant challenging the very foundations of the universe as it was known. Economically, Copernicus's era was no cakewalk either. The 16th century was a time of economic upheaval, with currency devaluation and inflation as common as a cold in winter. His contributions to monetary theory, particularly his insights into currency value, like Gresham's law, proved that his genius wasn't confined to the stars alone. He understood that the universe, much like the economy, operated on principles that, once uncovered, could alter the course of history. Now, about those myths. The romantic notion of Copernicus as the lone dreamer, hiding his bold ideas from a world not ready to hear them. It's a compelling narrative, the kind that sells books and fills lecture halls. But the truth is, while Copernicus was cautious about his revolutionary ideas, he wasn't the shrinking violet some make him out to be. He was deliberate, yes, but more concerned with scholarly accuracy than fear of the Inquisition's wrath. He was a perfectionist, not a coward. And here's the thing about Copernicus. His life might seem like a slow-paced medieval sitcom to us modern thrill-seekers, but he was living on the edge of a new scientific frontier. Picture him as a Renaissance rebel, quietly redefining the cosmos one calculation at a time. He may not have been the loudest voice in the room, but he didn't need to be. His ideas spoke volumes, echoing through the corridors of time long after he was gone. So, what can we take away from Copernicus's story? It's a reminder that true revolutions often start not with a bang, but with the quiet rustle of pages and the soft scratch of a quill. His heliocentric theory didn't just change our view of the heavens, it changed our understanding of our place in the universe. It was a cosmic shift that laid the groundwork for all future exploration, setting humanity on a path toward the stars. As we wrap up this cosmic journey, let's tip our hats to Copernicus, the man who dared to move the earth, and in doing so, moved us all. His legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity, the courage to question, and the quiet perseverance of a mind unafraid to challenge the status quo. In a universe that often feels vast and unknowable, Copernicus's story is a beacon of light, guiding us ever forward in our quest to understand the cosmos and our place within it. 14,000 years ago, when people were still figuring out the complex relationship between a rock and a hard place, a group of enterprising folks in what we now call Japan were busy revolutionizing the future of human culture. They weren't just doodling with sticks in the dirt. They were shaping clay into parts. That's right, pottery was the new black, and the Jomon culture was all over it like millennials on avocado toast. To put it into context, the Jomon people were the ancient influencers of their time, and pottery was their Instagram. They weren't just fumbling around with mud for kicks. They were crafting pieces that would make any contemporary art critic swoon. The Jomon parts were intricate, with cord-marked designs, hence the name Jomon, which literally means cord-marked in Japanese. These weren't your standard issue clay mugs. Some of these vessels are so ornate, they put your grandma's porcelain collection to shame. The Jomon culture wasn't just about pretty pottery, though. These folks were setting the groundwork for the kind of community life that would give rise to Japan's first social revolution. Imagine a world where people were transitioning from a nomadic lifestyle to one that was more settled. The ability to store food in pottery meant that the Jomon people could settle down, grow roots, and quite literally, watch grass grow. It's the stuff of early civilization, folks. Economically speaking, pottery was a game changer. It meant food storage could last beyond the immediate hunt or harvest, which was a big deal. We're talking about a time when the average lifespan was roughly 30 to 35 years, and survival wasn't just a reality TV show concept. A good part could mean the difference between surviving the winter or becoming an archaeological footnote. But let's not get too romantic about it. Life in Jomon-era Japan was no utopia. The climate was temperate, sure, but that also meant dealing with the elements in ways that make modern complaints about the weather seem laughable. Plus, while their pottery skills were top-notch, they still had to contend with the basics of survival: hunting, gathering, and the odd saber-toothed tiger. You know, just the usual prehistoric hassles. Politically, well, the Jomon weren't exactly setting up parliamentary systems or debating democracy, but they were laying down the social frameworks that would later influence Japan's more structured societies. The communities were starting to form, with leadership roles likely emerging around who could craft the best parts or snag the biggest deer. Not quite the House of Commons, but it was a start. It's tempting to mythologize these ancient people as idyllic harmony seekers, all come-bear around the communal fire. But the truth is, like any society, they had their conflicts and challenges. Archaeological findings suggest some level of violence and competition, because what's a community without a little drama? Yet, the Jomon culture thrived, with evidence of their existence stretching over a staggering 10,000 years. That's a pretty good run, considering most modern empires struggle to hit the millennium mark. In the grand tapestry of human history, the Jomon culture is a testament to our species' ability to innovate and adapt. They took a simple material like clay and turned it into a cornerstone of social advancement. The parts they left behind tell us stories of survival, creativity, and the dawn of settled life. Not too shabby for a bunch of prehistoric potters, eh? So next time you're sipping coffee from your ceramic mug, give a nod to the Jomon. They were the original trendsetters, paving the way for generations of potters, artists, and yes, even Instagram influencers. They proved that with a bit of mud and a lot of creativity, you could change the course of history, or at the very least, ensure your leftovers didn't spoil. And speaking of paving the way, let's stroll down the dirt paths of Jomon daily life, quite literally. Picture the scene. You're in a Jomon village, where minimalism wasn't a lifestyle choice but a necessity. Forget Marie Kondo. These folks only kept what they could carry, which wasn't much. Their possessions were sparse but functional. Think of it as prehistoric tiny house living without the Pinterest boards. Now, onto the culinary delights of the Jomon diet. These people were the original farm-to-table enthusiasts, minus the farm. Their menu was an organic smorgasbord: nuts, berries, fish, and the occasional wild boar if they were feeling like a splurge. Shell middens, essentially ancient trash heaps, reveal they were big on shellfish. Mussels, clams, and snails were the Jomon version of tapas. And while we're on the topic of meals, let's not forget that the Jomon were some of the earliest adopters of fermented foods. Yes, even 5,000 years ago, someone was looking at rotting fish and thinking, hey, this could be dinner. Their hunter-gatherer lifestyle was a sophisticated operation. They didn't just wander aimlessly in search of food. These folks understood seasonal cycles and knew when to move to the coast for fish or retreat inland for nuts and game. This was survival strategy, not just a stroll through the woods. And when it came to tools, the Jomon were like the Swiss Army knife of the prehistoric world. They crafted stone tools for hunting and fishing, using obsidian and other local stones. This was long before you could hit up your favorite online retailer for a new gadget. Every tool was handmade, and they were the ultimate DIYers. But let's talk style, because if you thought modern hipsters had the market cornered on eccentric hair and expressive fashion, think again. The Jomon were rocking hairstyles that would make even the most avant-garde barbers do a double take. Archaeological finds suggest they adorned themselves with bone ornaments and shell accessories. Move over, man bun. The Jomon top knot might just be the original statement do. Their fashion choices were practical too. Clothing crafted from woven fibers and animal hides was all about utility, yet they managed to add personal flair. It was practical couture, if you will. Economically, the Jomon life was all about resourcefulness. They didn't have currency as we know it, but they engaged in a form of barter. It was trade without the stock market crash. They swapped goods like obsidian, which was as valuable to them as gold is today. This indicates a network of trade routes, a prehistoric Silk Road of sorts. connecting various German communities. The exchange of goods wasn't just about economic survival, but also about social interaction, perhaps sealing alliances or avoiding conflicts. Who knew a shiny rock could be the peace treaty of its day? But don't get too swept up in the romanticism of this society, living in harmony with nature. The reality was harsh. Infant mortality rates were high, and a simple injury could be a death sentence. Climate changes often threw a wrench in their well-oiled survival machine. One year you're feasting on acorns, and the next year a cold snap wipes out your food supply. It was a constant game of adaptation, and those who couldn't keep up didn't last long. Socially, life was centered around the community, but it wasn't all campfire sing-alongs. Evidence of defensive structures and weapons suggests they weren't immune to conflict. Territorial disputes likely arose, and power dynamics were complex. Leadership could have been based on age, wisdom, or perhaps whoever held the biggest clamshell. The Jomon were egalitarian in some respects. They still had hierarchies, proof that even in the most communal societies, someone's got to be in charge of the snack run. And let's dispel the myth that they were just simple hunter-gatherers. The Jomon had a nuanced relationship with their environment. They practiced a form of proto-agriculture, managing plant resources in ways that increased productivity. They understood, and perhaps even manipulated, their ecosystem to ensure survival. This wasn't just living off the land. It was an early form of environmental engineering. In the end, the Jomon were a testament to human ingenuity long before the advent of modern technology. They thrived in a world that demanded resilience and creativity. Their legacy isn't just a collection of parts and tools. It's a story of adaptation and survival. So next time you're digging into a meal, adorned with the latest fashion, or navigating your social network, remember your ancient predecessors. They paved the path with grit and resourcefulness, making the most of what they had. And maybe, just maybe, there's a lesson in that for us modern folks, too. So, while the Jomon were busy rewriting the rulebook on survival, let's zoom in on their architectural prowess, because these folks were way ahead of the curve when it came to sustainable living. You've heard of pit dwellings, right? Think of them as the original tiny houses, before they got co-opted by hipsters and HGTV. These subterranean sanctuaries were not just a clever use of space, but an ingenious response to the whims of Mother Nature, who, let's face it, can be a bit of a diva. The Jomon pit dwellings, or Taitana, were essentially shallow pits, dug into the earth with a roof structure supported by wooden posts. Picture this. You're stepping down into a cozy, earth-insulated abode, perfect for maintaining a stable temperature year-round. Talk about energy efficiency. These homes were typically about 4 to 6 meters in diameter, with a charmingly rustic thatched roof. And while they didn't have central heating or air conditioning, they were masters of passive climate control. It's like they had their own prehistoric version of LEED certification. Now, why opt for an underground lifestyle, you ask? Well, let's just say Japan's weather isn't exactly known for being mild and predictable. The Jomon had to contend with everything from scorching summers to bone-chilling winters, not to mention the odd typhoon. Pit dwellings were a dream solution, providing protection from the elements and a bit of privacy from nosy neighbors. Because even 5,000 years ago, people were probably peeking over the proverbial fence. And speaking of neighbors, it's easy to envision the Jomon gathering to discuss the latest community gossip in what might have been history's first HOA meetings. Whether they were bickering over who had the best thatch or planning the next big shindig, community was at the heart of Jomon life. These dwellings were often clustered together, forming small villages where social bonds were as strong as the wooden beams holding up their roofs. But let's not get too romantic here. These weren't utopian communes where everyone sang cumbare around the fire pit. Evidence suggests that Jomon villages were sometimes fortified, a clear sign that not all neighborly interactions involved borrowing a cup of sugar. Defensive structures hint at a world where territorial disputes and raids were part of the landscape. It wasn't just about whose hut was the nicest. It was about survival in a world where resources were finite and competition was fierce. Economically, these pit dwellings were a testament to the Jomon's resourcefulness. Building materials were locally sourced, utilizing wood, clay, and thatch. This wasn't just about sustainability, it was necessity. There weren't any home improvement stores to run to when you ran out of lumber. Every piece of construction had to be meticulously planned and executed. And while they didn't have architects drawing up blueprints, they clearly understood the importance of design and function. It's a marvel of human ingenuity, considering they were doing this long before CAD programs and construction cranes. Now, let's bust some myths, shall we? It's tempting to picture these dwellings as idyllic hobbit holes, but the reality was more rugged. Life in a pit dwelling wasn't exactly a Pinterest wonderland. For one, hygiene was a challenge. Without modern plumbing, keeping things clean was a constant battle. And let's not even get started on pest control. You think dealing with mice is tough? Try contending with the prehistoric critters that called these pits home. Yet, despite these challenges, the Jomon thrived, proving that a little mud on your shoes was a small price to pay for stability and security. Socially, the design of these villages speaks volumes about the Jomon way of life. The communal layout fostered interaction, but it also required a level of cooperation that would make any modern neighborhood association proud. Decisions about land use, resource allocation, and social events were likely made collectively, with input from various voices. This wasn't a top-down hierarchy. It was a community effort, where leadership might have rotated based on expertise or charisma. It's a fascinating glimpse into early forms of social governance. In terms of cultural impact, these structures were more than just homes. They were symbols of a shift in human behavior. Moving from a nomadic lifestyle to a settled existence required a rethinking of social norms and priorities. The Jomon were pioneering a new way of life, one that valued permanence and stability over constant movement. It was a revolution in thought as much as it was in architecture. And while we're on the topic of revolutions, let's not forget that these dwellings were part of a larger tapestry of Jomon innovation. From pottery to pit houses, they were laying the groundwork for future generations, shaping the cultural and social landscape of Japan. These weren't just shelters. They were a declaration of resilience and adaptability in the face of an ever-changing world. So, as you ponder the allure of modern tiny houses and the minimalist lifestyle, spare a thought for the Jomon. They were the original small space aficionados, turning necessity into a virtue and pioneering a way of living that continues to inspire us today. Their story is one of creativity in the face of adversity, a testament to the human spirit and its endless capacity for innovation. They didn't just survive, they thrived, leaving behind a legacy of ingenuity and resourcefulness that echoes through the ages. And while we're marveling at their architectural feats, remember that the Jomon were more than just builders. They were creators of a vibrant, lasting culture. Their homes were a reflection of their values and a cornerstone of their society, proving that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most profound. As we continue to explore their legacy, we'll uncover even more of their secrets, revealing the rich tapestry of Jomon life and its enduring impact on the world. Stay tuned, because the story of the Jomon is far from over. And speaking of the Jomon's legacy, let's dive into the spiritual side of their culture, where shamanistic practices were as routine as your morning latte. Picture this. In a world where saber-toothed tigers were as real as today's celebrity gossip, the Jomon had their priorities straight. Connecting with the spiritual realm was essential. Forget about scrolling through Instagram for inspiration. These folks had Dagu figurines to channel their vibes. Now, Dagu aren't just your average clay figurines. They're the Jomon's way of saying, we take our spirituality seriously, but we also know how to party. These intricate pieces were typically no more than 10 to 30 centimeters tall, but they packed a punch. Crafted with the kind of flair that would make any modern sculptor green with envy, these figurines were believed to be conduits for communication with the spiritual world. Talk about having friends in high places. But let's not get carried away with the mysticism just yet. While it's tempting to imagine the Dagu as sacred objects that held the key to the universe, the reality is a bit more down to earth, literally. Made from clay, these figures often depicted exaggerated human features. Bug-eyed and pot-bellied, they make the latest fashion trends look downright tame. The Jomon had a knack for capturing the essence of human form with an artistic twist that would leave Picasso nodding in approval. Why the odd shapes, you ask? Well, some scholars suggest these exaggerated features might symbolize fertility, health, or protection. Others argue they were used in healing rituals, where shamans, think of them as the original life coaches, would perform ceremonies to ensure good harvests or ward off evil spirits. Imagine a Jomon shaman waving a dagu around like a magic wand, chanting away the bad juju. It's like Hogwarts, but with more mud and fewer owls. And speaking of rituals, the Jomon were big on ceremonies. From seasonal festivals that celebrated the harvest to rites of passage that marked significant life events, these gatherings were as integral to their society as the latest TikTok dance craze is to ours. They didn't just throw parties for fun. These were strategic moves to unite the community, reinforce social bonds, and maybe even impress the neighbors with their shamanistic prowess. But let's bust a myth or two while we're at it. The idea of Jomon rituals as idyllic, Cumbaya-style gatherings is a bit of a stretch. Sure, they might have had the ancient equivalent of a drum circle, but these events were also about survival, ensuring the guards were in a good mood so the next fishing trip didn't end in disaster. It was less peace and love, and more please don't let us starve. Economically speaking, these spiritual practices were intertwined with daily life. The Jomon didn't have the luxury of separating the sacred from the mundane. When you're living in a world where a bad storm could mean the difference between feast and famine, keeping the spirits happy was a full-time job. And let's not forget the role of the shaman, the original influencers, who likely held significant sway in the community. These spiritual leaders weren't just performing rituals. They were guiding the social and economic decisions of the day, ensuring resources were managed wisely and disputes settled peacefully. Politically, these gatherings were as much about power dynamics as they were about spirituality. The shaman's role was pivotal, not just a spiritual guide, but perhaps also a mediator and leader. In a society where hierarchies were as fluid as a Jomon river, the shaman held a unique position, wielding influence that went beyond the spiritual realm. It's like having a CEO who's also your therapist and your local weatherman. Talk about multitasking. And in case you're wondering, these spiritual practices weren't just isolated events. They were part of a broader tapestry of Jomon life, intricately woven into the fabric of their daily existence. From the way they interacted with nature to the design of their homes, everything was connected to their spiritual beliefs. It's a holistic approach that makes modern attempts at work-life balance look like child's play. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was that life in Jomon Japan was unpredictable, and spirituality was one way to make sense of the chaos. Whether it was a failed hunt, an unexpected drought, or a pesky neighbor trying to poach your best fishing spots, having a spiritual backup plan was just smart living. And while we might chuckle at the idea of clay figurines holding mystical powers, for the Jomon, these were serious tools for navigating a challenging world. Yet, despite the challenges, the Jomon thrived, driven by a combination of creativity, resilience, and a little help from the spirit world. Their rituals and beliefs were more than just quaint traditions. They were vital elements of a society that lasted millennia. As we continue to explore their world, it becomes clear that the Jomon story is a testament to human adaptability, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, we find ways to connect, create, and celebrate. So next time you find yourself searching for a little inspiration or a touch of tranquility, think of the Jomon and their dagu figurines. They might not have had smartphones or social media, but they knew a thing or two about finding balance in the chaos. And as we dig deeper into their spiritual practices, we'll uncover even more about the rich tapestry of Jomon life, leaving us with plenty to ponder and perhaps a few lessons to learn. Stay tuned, because the Jomon saga is far from finished. And speaking of lessons to learn, the Jomon saga wraps up with one of history's classic plot twists. Enter the Yaoi, stage left. With a swagger that only newcomers with shiny new toys could muster, the Yaoi rolled in around 300 BCE, armed with rice paddies and metal tools, ready to shake things up in a big way. The Jomon, with their clay parts and pit dwellings, suddenly found themselves in a prehistoric version of being upstaged by the cool kids with the latest tech gadgets. The Yaoi brought agriculture to the party, and not just any agriculture, rice cultivation. Let's pause for a moment and appreciate the sheer audacity of it. Rice wasn't just a food source, it was a complete game changer. It transformed the landscape from idyllic hunter-gatherer woodlands to organized fields, requiring a level of planning and cooperation that would make any project manager proud. Suddenly, life wasn't just about gathering what you could find or hunt. It was about planting, tending, and harvesting. Talk about a lifestyle overhaul. And while the Jomon were no slouches in the adaptation department, the Yayoi had something that was hard to beat: metal. They weren't just wielding stone tools, they had iron and bronze, which was like going from a flip phone to the latest smartphone overnight. This new tech made farming more efficient and gave them a serious edge in crafting weapons, tools, and even fancy new accessories. The Jomon, with their stone tools and cord-marked pottery, must have felt like they were living in the Flintstones next to the Jetsons. But let's not paint the Yayoi as villains in this story. They didn't just roll over the Jomon like a steamroller. It was more of a cultural exchange, albeit a one-sided one. The Jomon, with their millennia of experience, didn't just vanish overnight. They absorbed some of these new practices, and in some places, the two cultures coexisted for a time. It's a reminder that cultural shifts are rarely as simple as one group replacing another. More often, it's a complex dance of adaptation and integration. But why did the Yayoi flourish while the Jomon declined? It boils down to one of history's greatest motivators: economics. Rice cultivation supported larger populations because it allowed for surplus production. A surplus meant not everyone had to be involved in food production. People could specialize in other trades, leading to more complex societies. Suddenly, you had tradespeople, artisans, and warriors, paving the way for a more hierarchical society. The Jomon's egalitarian lifestyle, while idyllic in its simplicity, couldn't compete with the efficiency and scalability of rice-based agriculture. Politically, this shift from a decentralized, egalitarian society to a more centralized, hierarchical one was significant. Power became more concentrated, with leaders who controlled the rice supply wielding significant influence. It's the age-old tale of whoever controls the food controls the power. The Yayoi also introduced new burial practices, which suggest changes in social structure and status, a stark contrast to the Jomon's communal approach to life and death. But let's not romanticize the Yayoi's rise as a peaceful transition to a better life for all. The archaeological record hints at conflicts, skirmishes between the settled Yayoi and the more nomadic Jomon, each vying for territory and resources. It wasn't all peaceful coexistence. There were likely territorial disputes and cultural clashes. Yet, through these struggles, a new cultural synthesis emerged, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become classical Japanese civilization. As these two cultures intertwined, the Jomon legacy didn't just evaporate. Elements of their lifestyle and traditions seeped into Yayoi practices, and some Jomon communities continue to thrive in remote areas, holding onto their traditions long after the Yayoi's arrival. It's a testament to human resilience and the enduring nature of culture, proving that even in the face of change, some traditions are too deeply rooted to disappear entirely. The Yayoi period ushered in not just new agricultural techniques, but also social and technological advancements that would shape the future of Japan. The introduction of wet rice farming can't be understated. It laid the economic foundation for future political states and social structures. It's like the original startup that went public, setting the stage for a new era of prosperity and complexity. But let's bust a few myths while we're wrapping things up. The Yayoi weren't some monolithic group that swept in and changed everything overnight. They were diverse, with regional variations that adapted to local conditions. This wasn't a uniform takeover. It was a gradual process, with different regions experiencing change at different paces. It's a reminder that history is as much about nuance and local adaptation as it is about sweeping narratives. And while the Yayoi are often credited with bringing about the dawn of a new era, it's crucial to remember the Jomon's lasting impact. Their innovations in pottery, community living, and environmental management left an indelible mark on the cultural landscape. They were the pioneers who laid the groundwork, and their legacy is woven into the fabric of Japanese history, even as the rice paddies stretched across the land. In the end, the transition from Jomon to Yayoi is a tale as old as time, of change, adaptation, and the relentless march of progress. It's a story of how new ideas can revolutionize societies, but also a reminder that the past is never truly gone. It lives on in the traditions, practices, and innovations that we carry forward. So, next time you enjoy a bowl of rice or admire a piece of pottery, take a moment to appreciate the journey from Jomon clay to Yayoi rice paddies. It's a testament to human innovation and resilience, a story of how cultures evolve and adapt, always building on the legacy of those who came before. And as we close this chapter, remember that history is never static. It's a living, breathing tapestry, woven from the threads of countless lives, each contributing to the grand narrative of human existence. In the cradle of civilization, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers invited humanity to settle down for the long haul, we find Mesopotamia, literally the land between rivers. This wasn't just any patch of dirt. This was prime real estate for the ambitious Neolithic farmer who'd had it up to here with foraging for scraps, like a prehistoric Uber Eats. The geography was a veritable paradise for anyone willing to roll up their tunic sleeves and get to farming. Unlike the arid deserts that stretched beyond its riverbanks, Mesopotamia was a fertile crescent, a place where crops could thrive with a little help from its watery neighbors. Picture a patch of land so enticing, it made nomads drop their tents and think, yeah, permanent housing sounds good. The Tigris and Euphrates weren't just rivers. They were the lifelines that made Sumerian civilization possible. These rivers provided water, yes, but they also enabled transportation and trade. They turned a stretch of land into the bustling heart of ancient innovation. If the Sumerians were alive today, they'd probably have Instagram accounts filled with photos of their lush fields, captioned with hashtags like #irrigation goals. Speaking of irrigation, here's where the Sumerians really flexed their ancient engineering muscles. They didn't just plant and pray for rain. They took control of their destiny with a network of canals and dikes. This wasn't just a matter of turning on the tap. This was the Bronze Age equivalent of a civil engineering marvel. By the way, this wasn't just a couple of ditches. It was a massive undertaking that would impress even modern-day civil engineers. They effectively turned unpredictable flooding into a predictable agricultural cycle. Floodwaters were redirected, stored, and utilized to grow crops like barley and wheat, which were the backbone of the Sumerian diet. Now, let's debunk a myth or two about these early city-states. Popular narratives often paint a picture of harmonious living, where city-states coexisted peacefully, exchanging goods and pleasantries over the city walls. The reality, not so much. These were ancient city-states, not contestants on a reality TV show called Coexistence Island. Each city-state was more like a fiercely independent entity, with its own ruler, own deity, and own ambitions. They were like medieval fiefdoms, only a few thousand years earlier, and with a higher risk of getting swept away by a rogue flood. Territorial disputes were as common as a Sumerian sunrise. If you think modern politics is cutthroat, just wait until you hear about these guys. Sumerian city-states were constantly embroiled in conflicts over land and resources. When you're dependent on a river for survival, you tend to get a little touchy about who controls it. Need an example? Look no further than the city of Lagash and its neighbor Umma, whose rivalry was so intense it was practically a blood feud. They fought over a strip of land called Guedin, like it was the last piece of pizza at a family reunion. We're talking about disputes that lasted over a century, filled with treaties, betrayals, and more twists than a soap opera. And here's where the romantic notions of peaceful coexistence take a backseat to the truth. The city-states didn't just squabble over land. They also vied for political dominance. The Sumerians were inventors, builders, and warriors, often all three before breakfast. The rise of these city-states was marked by a constant push and pull for control, both internally and with the neighbors. It's a testament to their resilience and ingenuity that they managed to create some of the first known civilizations, despite the constant threat of conflict. In this volatile environment, kings and priests played pivotal roles, often serving as both political and religious leaders. They controlled not just the temples, but also the granaries, which were essentially the banks of the time. If you controlled the grain, you controlled the power. Forget gold. Barley was the currency that mattered. This meant that the Sumerians weren't just inventing the wheel and cuneiform, they were also inventing bureaucracy and early forms of economic control. It was a world where politics, religion, and agriculture were as intertwined as the reeds in their riverbanks. As we dive deeper into the rise of Sumerian city-states, remember this. These weren't just historical footnotes. These were vibrant, complex societies that laid the groundwork for much of what we consider the hallmarks of civilization today. And while the romantic myths of peaceful Sumerians might be comforting bedtime stories, the truth is far more interesting. These city-states were the original Game of Thrones, a place where survival depended on innovation, strategy, and a healthy dose of divine intervention. So, next time someone tries to sell you on the idyllic life of ancient city-states, just remember, behind every peaceful myth is a reality that's even more fascinating. And speaking of divine intervention, let's talk about the VIPs of Sumerian society, the priests and kings. These guys knew how to work a room, or in this case, a temple. They claimed the gods had given them the keys to the kingdom, and who were the common folk to argue with that? After all, if someone says they've got a direct line to the gods, you might just think twice before questioning their authority. But let's not kid ourselves. The whole divine authority gig was as much about politics as it was about piety. These leaders were savvy operators, blending religious power with political savvy to maintain their grip on the city-states. First up, the priests. Imagine them as the ultimate multitaskers of their day. They weren't just the guys you went to for spiritual guidance. They were also the ones keeping tabs on the economy. Temples in Sumer weren't just places of worship. They were economic powerhouses, managing vast tracts of land and overseeing the production of goods. The priests were the original spreadsheet nerds, recording everything from grain harvests to livestock numbers on clay tablets. Cuneiform, that ancient script that's as photogenic as a cat in a box, was invented primarily for this purpose, keeping track of the Sumerian economy. Forget romantic poetry. This was the Bronze Age equivalent of bookkeeping. Now, let's not forget the kings, who were often seen as semi-divine figures themselves. These rulers claimed they had been chosen by the gods to lead, which is a pretty good way to keep the opposition quiet. Take Gilgamesh, for example. This legendary king of Uruk was said to be 2/3 god and 1/3 human, which seems like a pretty sweet genetic setup if you ask me. But beyond the myths, kings were the ones making the tough calls, deciding when to go to war, negotiating alliances, and settling disputes over that all-important resource, water. It was a tough job, but someone's got to do it when the fate of your city-state hangs in the balance. So how did the social hierarchy shake out? At the top, you had the king and the priests, followed by a class of nobles and officials who helped run the show. Below them were the merchants and artisans, the folks who kept the economy humming along. And at the bottom, you had the farmers and laborers, the ones doing the literal heavy lifting to keep those grain stores full. It was a system that allowed the city-states to function smoothly, at least when they weren't busy squabbling over territory or trade routes. Speaking of trade, let's dive into the economic engine that powered Sumerian society. These guys were the original globalists, trading goods across vast distances. The Sumerians didn't just settle for what was in their backyard. They reached out to distant lands for resources they lacked. They traded barley and textiles for timber from Lebanon, copper from Oman, and gold from the Indus Valley. This wasn't just about getting the latest luxury goods, though that certainly played a part. Trade was essential for survival, ensuring that the city-states had the materials needed for everything from building projects to military campaigns. Now, before you start thinking this ancient trade was all treasure chests and exotic silks, let's set the record straight. The Sumerian trade network was more akin to a network of barter agreements than a bustling stock exchange. It was a complex web of relationships, built on trust and mutual benefit. While the romantic image of the ancient merchant might have you picturing a suave, sandal-wearing negotiator, the reality was likely far more mundane. These were tough deals, often conducted in harsh conditions, with an emphasis on practicality over panache. And what about writing, that quintessential mark of civilization? As mentioned earlier, it kicked off with the pragmatic purpose of keeping track of goods and resources. Those quaint little clay tablets served as receipts, contracts, and inventories, providing a written record that was as binding as it was brittle. The Sumerians were the first to transform language into a tangible form, but let's not romanticize it too much. This wasn't about crafting epic narratives or romantic sonnets. It was about ensuring everyone knew exactly who owed what and when. In this world of divine kingship, economic networks, and early writing, the Sumerians laid down the tracks for many future civilizations. Their city-states were vibrant, bustling hubs of innovation and intrigue, where the lines between religion, politics, and economics blurred into one complex tapestry. And while the legends of their divine rulers might inspire awe, It's the gritty reality of their achievements that truly captivates. They were pioneers in every sense of the word, navigating the challenges of their time with a mixture of cunning, creativity, and sheer determination. So, the next time you hear about the peaceful, idyllic life of ancient city-states, remember this. Behind every peaceful myth is a reality that's even more fascinating. The Sumerians were the original architects of civilization, carving out a legacy that would shape the world for millennia to come. As we continue to explore their story, keep in mind the real drama behind the myths, a tale of power, innovation, the relentless drive to survive in a world where nothing was ever guaranteed. Now that we've set the stage, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Sumerian innovation, where necessity wasn't just the mother of invention. It was the relentless taskmaster with a clipboard and a stopwatch. Picture the Sumerians, not as toga-wearing dreamers pondering the stars, but as practical problem solvers. Their greatest hits aren't just about grandeur, they're about grit. Take the wheel, for instance. This wasn't dreamed up for leisurely Sunday drives through the Mesopotamian landscape. Nope, the wheel was more about lugging barley and bricks than cruising in style. Think of it as the Bronze Age's answer to FedEx. The earliest wheels, dating back to around 3500 BCE, were solid wooden discs slapped onto axles. Not exactly Formula One material, but perfect for moving heavy loads across the rough and rutted terrain of Sumerian city-states. Real genius here was in the axle and wheel combo, which revolutionized transportation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was game-changing, transforming how goods and materials were moved, reducing the manpower needed to haul them by sheer muscle power. So, while the romantic image might be of chariots racing across dusty plains, the reality was far more pedestrian and far more impactful. And speaking of the mundane turned monumental, let's talk about the ziggurat. Forget your skyscrapers with their glass facades. The ziggurat was the ancient equivalent of a statement building. These massive stepped towers weren't just about touching the heavens or giving the gods a direct line to earth. They were as much about civic pride and political power as they were about piety. The famous ziggurat of constructed around 2100 BCE, stood as a testament to the labor and resources that a city-state could muster. Rising to approximately 100 feet, it wasn't just a religious focal point. It was a demonstration of what centralized authority and organization could achieve. But let's not get too misty-eyed over these mud brick marvels. Building a ziggurat was about as romantic as a modern-day construction site. The towering structures required a workforce that wasn't exactly there for the love of the job. These were often conscripted laborers, toiling under the blistering sun, with little more than basic tools and a lot of elbow grease. And let's talk materials. Mesopotamia wasn't exactly rich in stone, so they relied on mud bricks, thousands upon thousands, all molded by hand. The ziggurat wasn't just an architectural feat. It was a testament to the sheer manpower and resources a king could command. Now, while we're on the topic of Sumerian practicality, let's address another cornerstone of their culture, the plow. This wasn't just about improving agricultural efficiency. It was about survival. With fertile land came the pressure to produce enough food to support growing populations and fund ambitious projects like our aforementioned ziggurats. The Sumerians took the basic concept of a digging stick and transformed it into an agricultural powerhouse. By 3000 BCE, they developed a cedar plow that combined tilling and planting in one go. Talk about a multitasker. The plow revolutionized farming, allowing for larger areas to be cultivated with less labor. It meant more food, more trade, and ultimately more power for the city-states. But before you get carried away with images of pastoral bliss, remember this. Farming in ancient Sumer wasn't a bucolic daydream. It was backbreaking work, dependent on a precarious balance of water and weather. Too much rain, and you were underwater. Too little, and you were looking at a famine. This was an era where agriculture was as much about crisis management as it was about crop yields. And let's not forget the unsung heroes of Sumerian innovation, the potters and metallurgists. The invention of the potter's wheel around 3500 BCE allowed for the mass production of pottery, essential for storing the surplus of agricultural bounty. Meanwhile, the Sumerians' mastery of metallurgy wasn't just for creating shiny trinkets. By around 2900 BCE, they were smelting copper and later bronze, which was a game changer in everything from tools to weaponry. It was less about creating art and more about making life a little less brutish. So, as we marvel at the achievements of the Sumerians, let's keep in mind the reality behind the romance. These weren't just creative geniuses. They were practical problem solvers facing the harsh demands of their environment. Their innovations weren't driven by a quest for beauty or glory, but by necessity and survival. The grandeur of Sumerian culture wasn't just about towering ziggurats or gleaming wheels. It was about the sweat and toil that made them possible. As we continue this journey through their world, let's remember that behind every awe-inspiring myth lies a story of struggle, ingenuity, and the relentless drive to make the best out of what they had. Now, let's pivot from the grind of Sumerian innovation to the celestial soap opera that was their religion. Forget your average pantheon. Sumerian gods were the rock stars of antiquity, with egos as vast as the Mesopotamian plains. Enlil, the god of air, could have given Zeus a run for his lightning bolts with his temper tantrums. And then there's Inanna, the goddess of love and war, who could switch from smitten to smiting in the blink of an eye. Picture a divine hierarchy where even a minor deity had more drama than your favorite TV antihero. At the heart of Sumerian religion was the belief that the gods were as temperamental as a toddler denied a treat. Natural disasters. Blame Enlil for that flood. Crops failing. Maybe the gods were bored and decided to throw a celestial spanner in the works. This belief system wasn't just a matter of faith. It was a survival strategy. Sumerians lived in a world where capricious deities were the ultimate landlords, and keeping them happy was a full-time job. Temples weren't just spiritual hubs. They were the epicenters of city life, where gods were wined, dined, and hopefully placated. Enter the Epic of Gilgamesh, the ancient narrative that's been dubbed the world's first great work of literature. Think of it as the ultimate buddy adventure, featuring Gilgamesh, the real-life king of Uruk, and his wild man's sidekick, Enkidu. Sure, the story's got a few embellishments. Gilgamesh wasn't actually 1/3 human and 2/3 divine, but who says you can't dream big? This tale is a window into Sumerian values, exploring friendship, heroism, and the eternal quest for immortality. Now, let's separate the fact from the fiction. Gilgamesh was indeed a historical figure, ruling around 2700 BCE. But the epic itself, written centuries later, is more poetic license than biography. This story delves into themes that still resonate today: the fear of death, the search for meaning, and the power of legacy. And while Gilgamesh's quest for eternal life might seem lofty, it's rooted in a very real anxiety. Sumerians viewed the afterlife as a bleak, shadowy underworld, a place about as inviting as Monday morning without coffee. Speaking of the afterlife, the Sumerian vision was more eternal gloom than heavenly paradise. Imagine spending eternity in a dusty, dreary netherworld, munching on clay and sipping muddy water. The only way to ensure a slightly better afterlife was through ritual offerings and proper burial rites. This wasn't just religious doctrine, it was social obligation. How you treated your dead reflected your piety and standing in society. If nothing else, it was an effective way to keep people invested in the rituals that maintained social cohesion. Now, you might be wondering how all this divine drama impacted everyday life. Religion was woven into the very fabric of Sumerian society, influencing everything from politics to agriculture. Priests held considerable sway, interpreting divine will and overseeing temple economies. The gods were seen as the ultimate authority, meaning that even kings had to kneel, at least metaphorically, to the divine whims. And while the divine right of kings might seem like a power play, it was also a way to legitimize and stabilize their rule. After all, if the gods were on your side, who could question your mandate? But don't get too caught up in the celestial theatrics. The Sumerians were nothing if not pragmatic. Their mythology might have been as colorful as a peacock's tail, but their real-world decisions were grounded in practicality. Take their approach to governance. City-states were often led by a council of elders alongside the king, ensuring that no single voice could overpower the collective wisdom. This wasn't some egalitarian utopia. It was about survival and maintaining order amid the chaos of competing gods and city-states. And let's not forget the economic angle. Religion was big business in Sumer. Temples controlled vast amounts of land and resources, acting as economic powerhouses. The offerings brought by the faithful weren't just tokens of piety. They were vital to the temples, and by extension, the city's economy. Priests were as much administrators as spiritual leaders, ensuring that the divine coffers were full and the city's future secure. So, what's the takeaway from this divine soap opera? In a world where gods walked among men, the Sumerians crafted a society as intricate as their mythology. Their religion was a reflection of their values, fears, and hopes, providing structure amidst the unpredictability of ancient life. While the drama of the gods might capture the imagination, it's the interplay of myth and reality that truly defines the Sumerian legacy. As we explore further, remember that behind every myth is a society grappling with the same existential questions that resonate through the ages. And so, as the gods danced their celestial ballet and the Sumerians tried to keep up, the stage was set for a not-so-grand finale. The decline of the Sumerian city-states is a tale as old as time. Internal squabbles, external threats, and a dash of environmental misfortune. It's like the universe hit them with the trifecta of ancient world problems. First up, let's talk internal strife. Imagine being in a family where every sibling thinks they're the favorite. That was Sumer. Each city-state was like a headstrong teenager convinced it was the center of the universe. And just like any good drama, when the stakes got high, the knives came out. These city-states were so busy squabbling over resources and power that they didn't notice the bigger threat looming on the horizon. Enter the Akkadians, an up-and-coming Mesopotamian culture with a serious chip on their shoulder. Around 2334 BCE, Sargon of Akkad decided he'd had enough of the Sumerian bickering. He marched in with his army, and like a Mesopotamian rock star, unified the region under his rule. Sargon's empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, and you've got to hand it to him. He was nothing if not ambitious. The Akkadians didn't just conquer, they absorbed and adapted. They took the best of Sumerian culture, including their cuneiform writing, and made it their own. It's like they were the ancient world's version of a tech startup, acquiring the competition and then innovating on top of it. But just as they were settling into their newfound power, the Akkadian Empire faced its own set of challenges. Climate change, yep, even back then, played a part, with a severe drought around 2200 BCE that sent the whole region into chaos. Back in Sumer, the city-states briefly reclaimed some independence after the fall of Akkad, but it was a short-lived victory. The real kicker was yet to come. By the time the third dynasty of rolled around in 2112 BCE, Sumerians were dealing with a regional power shift. The Elamites and Amorites, among others, were knocking at the door, eager to carve out their piece of the Mesopotamian pie. It was like a game of ancient musical chairs, and the Sumerians were left standing when the music stopped. By around 2004 BCE, was sacked, and the Sumerian dominance was effectively over. But before you start feeling too sorry for the Sumerians, remember this: their legacy was far from buried. Their innovations, from writing to urban planning, left an indelible mark on the world. Let's start with cuneiform, the OG of written communication. It wasn't just about keeping tabs on grain stores or writing epic tales. It was the foundation for complex administration and record-keeping that future civilizations would build upon. The Babylonians and Assyrians took cuneiform and ran with it, creating libraries and archives that would be the envy of any ancient scholar. Next up, the wheel. This wasn't just a turning point, pun absolutely intended, for Sumer. It was a key innovation that would revolutionize transportation and trade for centuries. From chariots to carts, the wheel became a staple in every culture that followed. It was the original "why didn't we think of this sooner?" moment in human history. And while it might not have been glamorous, it was a game changer that powered ancient economies and military campaigns alike. Then there's the matter of governance. The Sumerian city-state model, with its blend of religious and political authority, set the stage for later empires. They demonstrated the power of centralized authority and the benefits and pitfalls of urbanization. Their approach to law, famously codified in the Code of Ur-Nammu around 2100 BCE, laid the groundwork for Hammurabi's more famous code a few centuries later. It's the legal equivalent of passing the torch, ensuring that justice, however rudimentary, was part of the social fabric. And let's not forget agriculture. The Sumerians didn't just grow crops, they engineered their environment to do so more efficiently. Their irrigation techniques proved that humans could adapt the landscape to their needs, a lesson that hasn't lost its relevance. From the Nile to the Indus, civilizations looked to Sumer's agricultural practices as a model to emulate. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and barley. The Sumerians also left behind a legacy of conflict and rivalry that would echo through the ages. Their incessant wars over land and water rights served as cautionary tales for future generations. It's a reminder that while innovation can propel a society forward, unchecked ambition and discord can just as easily lead to its downfall. So, what do we take away from the rise and fall of the Sumerian city-states? They were pioneers, yes, but not saints. They laid the groundwork for civilization as we know it, but they also fell prey to the very human flaws of hubris and short-sightedness. Their story is a testament to the dual nature of progress, the capacity for great achievement and the potential for self-destruction. As we wrap up this journey through the dusty streets and towering ziggurats of ancient Sumer, let's remember that history is a complex tapestry woven from the threads of triumph and tragedy. The Sumerians may have faded into the mists of time, but their legacy endures. They remind us that even in the cradle of civilization, humanity was grappling with the same questions and challenges we face today. In their rise and fall, we see a reflection of ourselves, a civilization striving for greatness, stumbling and rising again. It's a story as old as time and as fresh as tomorrow's headlines. The Nile River, your lifeline and nemesis, rumbles like a giant waking up from a long slumber, stretching its limbs between June and September. Every year, without fail, it swells with the predictability of a taxman, reminding you that nature doesn't follow your schedule, you follow hers. You know this flood isn't just a soggy inconvenience. It's the beating heart of civilization, the reason why the barren desert isn't your permanent address. You're an ancient Egyptian, and the inundation is your annual 3-month wet blanket, both literally and metaphorically. But let's face it, this isn't a mere weather event. It's the grand spectacle of your existence. The Nile's floodwaters have a flair for the dramatic, rising up to 23 feet in a good year. Too little, and you're staring famine in the face. Too much, and you're floating away with the livestock. Just right, and you've got what you need to feed the kingdom and pay your taxes, because yes, even in ancient Egypt, taxes were as inevitable as death. Speaking of inevitability, the flood isn't just an agricultural necessity. It's a cosmic dance. Its reliability is what keeps your society ticking. The annual rise was so consistent that it became the calendar's backbone, marking the beginning of your year, Akit. The priests, with their eyes glued to the stars, told you it was all thanks to the tears of Isis mourning Osiris. It's a poetic tale, perfect for bedtime stories, if you like your myths with a side of sibling drama. But as romantic as that sounds, your survival depends on getting the practical side right. You see, the Nile's gift of silt-rich water transforms the landscape, turning the fields into a black, fertile paradise. It's the original organic farming, no pesticides required. And while today's farmers might envy your natural fertilizer, you know there's no free lunch. Once the waters recede, you and your neighbors are out there with hoes and cattle, tilling the land like your life depends on it, because it does. You've got grains to grow, and the kingdom's granaries don't fill themselves. But there's a twist. This isn't just about agriculture. The flood's more than just muddy boots and planting schedules. It's economic lifeblood. Your pharaoh, sitting in his sun-baked palace, keeps a keen eye on those waters. A good inundation means prosperity. A bad one, well, that's when heads might roll. Quite literally. When the flood's good, trade flourishes, taxes roll in, and temples get their share, ensuring the balance and order of the universe, holds. Screw it up and chaos or Isfit marks its territory. And speaking of balance and chaos, let's talk about the social ladder. The flood doesn't just reset the fields, it resets social dynamics too. You're not just a farmer anymore. You're a cog in the economic machine of the greatest civilization of the age. Sure, the pharaoh gets the glory, but your contribution is the unsung verse of the Egyptian hymn. Your toil is what keeps the kingdom from crumbling like a stale loaf of bread. Now let's address the elephant, or the crocodile, in the room. The flood wasn't always a gentle giant. Sometimes it seemed like Sobek, the crocodile god, had a hand in things, causing chaos with overzealous waves. The water engulfing your home isn't the stuff of romantic myths. It's reality, harsh and wet. But that's the double-edged sword of the Nile. Its power to give life is equal to its power to take it away. So here you are, every year, watching the river rise, wading, praying, hoping it behaves. You've learned to read its signs like a seasoned gambler watches the dice, knowing that your fate is tied to this waterway. The flood isn't just a natural phenomenon, it's a reminder of your place in the world. A world where you're at the mercy of forces far greater than yourself. But with the right amount of luck and a fair bit of toil, you can carve out a life here, one flood at a time. As you watch the Nile's waters rise and fall like a natural rhythm section, you might think it's all a matter of waiting and hoping for the best. But you'd be wrong, my friend. The ancient Egyptians weren't just passive spectators in nature's grand opera. They were the stage directors, and boy, did they have some impressive tricks up their linen sleeves to make sure the show went on smoothly. Enter the shadaf, a device that's as clever as it is simple. Picture a seesaw, but instead of playground antics, it's used for life-sustaining water management. This contraption, made of a long pole balanced on a fulcrum with a bucket at one end and a counterweight at the other, was your goda for lifting water from the river to the fields. And let's be real, it's not going to win any innovation awards in today's tech-obsessed world, but back then, this was cutting-edge stuff. You could irrigate your fields with the precision of a surgeon, ensuring that the precious floodwaters didn't just drain away, taking your profits with them. But the shadaf was just the opening act. The true magic lay in what's known as basin irrigation. Think of it as a giant, natural jigsaw puzzle where each piece is a field section surrounded by dikes. As the floodwaters receded, they'd fill these basins, saturating the soil with all that nutritious silt. The farmers, let's call them the unsung heroes of the Nile, would then open and close channels, directing water with the finesse of a maestro conducting an orchestra. This method was so effective that it supported the cultivation of emmer wheat and barley, the staples of your Egyptian diet. Imagine harvesting enough grain to make bread, beer, and porridge. Not exactly a Michelin star menu, but it kept everyone alive and kicking. Now, let's not paint too rosy a picture. While the shadaf and basin irrigation were marvels of ingenuity, they didn't come without their share of sweat and backaches. The labor was intense, requiring a workforce that was as disciplined as it was relentless. And here's a little secret. Those workers weren't exactly thrilled about spending their days toiling under the scorching Egyptian sun. The romantic notion of the contented farmer whistling while he works. Yeah, not so much. Sure, they might have sung a tune or two, but it was probably more in the vein of a blues lament than a cheery ditty. Speaking of labor, we can't forget the canal systems. Oh, the canals, those winding, snaking channels that crisscross the landscape like the veins of a leaf. They were engineering feats that would make even the most seasoned civil engineer nod in appreciation. The Egyptians dug these canals to extend the reach of the Nile's waters far beyond its natural banks, turning arid land into fertile fields. These networks weren't just about irrigation. They were highways for transport, allowing goods and people to move with ease. But building and maintaining them, that was no walk in the park. It involved an army of workers, armed with nothing more than simple tools and sheer determination. So the next time someone romanticizes the grandeur of ancient Egypt, remember the reality, a lot of grit, grime, and some serious elbow grease. Now, we've got to talk about the big picture, the reason why all this effort was worth it. The Nile wasn't just the giver of life, it was the backbone of Egypt's economy. Every successful harvest meant more grain, and more grain meant more trade. The surplus fed not just the people, but also the coffers of the temples and the pharaoh's treasury. Without it, the grand monuments, those awe-inspiring testaments to human ambition, would never have come to be. The pyramids may have been built by slave labor, although recent evidence suggests a workforce of paid laborers, but they were funded by the bounty of the Nile. It was a cycle of give and take, a delicate balance that, when disrupted, could spell disaster. And there's another thing, the political implications. The pharaohs knew that their power was as much about perception as it was about reality. A well-managed flood meant a well-fed population, which in turn meant a contented one. And let's face it, a contented population is far less likely to start sharpening their pitchforks. Maintaining control over the water, both literally and metaphorically, was a way to maintain control over the people. So, as you contemplate the marvels of Egyptian agriculture, remember that it was a dance, a complex choreography of innovation, toil, and a little bit of luck. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of it all, to envision those noble farmers working in harmony with the land. But peel back the layers, and you'll find the realities of ancient life, gritty, unglamorous, and utterly fascinating. And just like that, you're one step deeper into the world of ancient Egypt. But don't get too comfortable. There's more to uncover in this historical saga. Stay tuned, because the story of how the Egyptians harnessed the might of the Nile is far from over. Now, let's dive deeper into the economic dance orchestrated by those ancient Egyptian maestros. It's not just about getting your toes wet in the Nile. It's about mastering the complex choreography of grain storage, taxation, and trade that turned the floodwaters into gold. Picture this. You've survived the flood, the fields are lush with crops, and you've harvested enough grain to make even the greediest of mice green with envy. But what happens next? Spoiler alert. It's not just a matter of munching on bread and sipping beer until you're blue in the face. Nope, it's time to play the long game, and that starts with grain storage. These ancient Egyptians were no slackers when it came to hoarding grain. They had granaries that could make a squirrel blush. Imagine massive mud brick silos, each one a fortress of food security, standing tall against the arid backdrop. These weren't just random heaps of straw and grain, mind you. They represented the beating heart of the economy. You see, grain wasn't just food, it was currency. In a world where coins and dollar bills were as non-existent as unicorns, grain was the real deal. It paid the workers, fed the priests, and kept the bureaucratic wheels greased. And speaking of bureaucrats, let's talk about taxation, the ancient pastime that has transcended time and space to remain a constant thorn in humanity's side. Back in the day, it wasn't just about handing over your hard-earned grain to some faceless official. No, it was a grand spectacle, a bureaucratic ballet where scribes, inspectors, and overseers danced to the tune of Pharaoh's demands. The grain tax wasn't just a suggestion, it was a mandate, often calculated based on the inundation's height. Too little water, and you'd be begging the guards for leniency. Too much, and you'd be hoping those scribes could swim. Now, let's throw some numbers into the mix. During a good year, the flood could deposit enough silt to increase arable land by up to 20%. That meant bumper crops, and consequently, more taxes. The state took a hefty cut, sometimes as much as 20% of your harvest, to fill the granaries that served as the kingdom's piggy bank. But hey, at least you weren't alone in feeling the pinch. Everyone from the humble farmer to the high priest had to cough up their share. It was a classic case of the more things change, the more they stay the same. But grain storage and taxation were just two steps in this economic tango. The real magic happened when all the grain hit the trade routes. Picture bustling markets along the Nile, where merchants haggled over sacks of wheat like they were the latest iPhone. Egypt was the breadbasket of the ancient world, and its grain was as coveted as gold. Ships laden with grain sailed down the Nile and out into the Mediterranean, trading with neighbors like the Levant, Cyprus, and Crete. In return, they brought back exotic goods, cedar wood, precious metals, luxury fabrics. It was a globalized economy before globalization was even a word. But the pharaohs weren't just sitting back and watching the grain flow like a lazy river. This was a tightly controlled operation, with an intricate bureaucracy ensuring that every kernel was accounted for. The state had the final say on who got what and when. It was a delicate balance, with the pharaoh's power hinging on his ability to manage these resources effectively. After all, in a land where the divine right of kings was as unquestioned as gravity, demonstrating control over the Nile's bounty was a surefire way to assert divine favor. And now, let's not sugarcoat it. When the floods went awry, things could turn ugly faster than you could say, Tutankhamun. A bad flood year could spell disaster, with famine waiting in the wings like an overzealous understudy. Imagine the panic as the granaries emptied, the markets dried up, and the people looked to the heavens for a savior. In such times, the pharaohs had to pull every string, tap into reserves, and sometimes even ration the grain to keep society from unraveling at the seams. It was an economic tightrope walk, with every step carrying the weight of the kingdom's future. So, while we often look back at ancient Egypt with starry eyes and visions of grandeur, let's remember the gritty reality that lay beneath those golden sands. The Egyptians' mastery over the Nile's flood wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving in a world where Mother Nature held all the cards. It's a tale of innovation and resilience, of bureaucratic genius and economic savvy. And as we continue to peel back the layers of this ancient civilization, we find that the story of the Nile's floods is as much about human ambition as it is about natural forces. But don't hang up your sandals just yet. Our journey through the annals of Egyptian history is far from over. There's more to discover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover. So stay tuned, because the saga of the Nile and its people is a tale that refuses to be washed away by the sands of time. And so, we plunge deeper into the labyrinth of ancient Egypt's social and political tapestry, where the Nile's flood wasn't just a hydrological event, but the very pulse of civilization. You see, in a world where nature's whims dictated survival, the Egyptians managed to weave an intricate web of hierarchy and belief that would make even the most seasoned political strategist nod in admiration. At the top of this pyramid, quite literally, stood the pharaoh, a figure as shrouded in divinity as he was in gold. Picture him not just as a king, but as a living god, a Horus among men, whose primary responsibility was to ensure that the Nile behaved itself. The mythos painted him as the celestial weatherman, divinely ordained to keep the floods in check. And let's be honest, that's a PR campaign worthy of Madison Avenue. But strip away the divine veneer, and what do you get? A ruler whose power was as much about maintaining the illusion as it was about managing resources. The reality was far less glamorous. One bad flood, and the pharaoh could find himself less of a god and more of a scapegoat, faster than you can say Tutankhamun. Now, let's break it down to brass tacks. The pharaoh's divine status was reinforced by a cadre of priests. Think of them as the original spin doctors, who controlled the narrative, and more importantly, the grain. These holy men were the keepers of Mad, the cosmic order, ensuring that everything from the stars to the floods adhered to divine will. In reality, they were as much bureaucrats as they were spiritual leaders, keeping meticulous records and ensuring the temple's coffers were as full as the granaries. And if you're wondering about numbers, let's talk about them. Temples could control up to 20% of arable land, wielding economic power that rivaled even the pharaohs. Beneath this divine duo of pharaoh and priests was the scribble class, the unsung heroes of the Egyptian administration. With reed pens in hand and papyrus rolls unfurled, these were the folks who turned the chaos of nature into the order of civilization. They kept tabs on taxes, recorded harvests, and managed the distribution of grain, a task so monumental it would make modern accountants break out in a cold sweat. These scribes were the gears in the machine, the ones who ensured that the kingdom didn't grind to a halt when the Nile played its annual game of will it flood or won't it. Let's not forget the backbone of this society, the farmers. These were the people for whom the phrase back-breaking work might as well have been invented. With hoes in hand and sweat on their brows, they toiled under the relentless sun, their fortunes literally rising and falling with the floodwaters. Yet despite their toil, they were bound to a social order that offered little in the way of upward mobility. The romantic notion of pastoral harmony. Yeah, that's a bedtime story. The truth is, these farmers were at the mercy of both the river and the rulers, their lives dictated by forces far beyond their control. And then there was the military, another crucial cog in the Egyptian machine. These weren't just warriors, they were also engineers, tasked with protecting the kingdom from both foreign invaders and the whims of the Nile. During periods of low inundation, when famine threatened, the military served as both protectors and enforcers, ensuring that grain distribution went according to plan. You could say they were the original multitaskers, balancing spears and shovels in equal measure. The social hierarchy was thus a delicate balance, a house of cards built on the unpredictable foundation of the Nile's floods. It was a system that worked well enough to sustain one of the world's earliest and most enduring civilizations, but it was also as fragile as the papyrus records that chronicled its existence. When everything aligned, Egypt thrived, producing surpluses that allowed for monumental architecture and cultural achievements. But when the floodwaters failed to deliver, the cracks in this carefully constructed society began to show. And here's where mythology stepped in, painting over those cracks with tales of divine favor and cosmic order. The flood was no mere river rise. It was the tears of Isis, mourning Osiris, the lifeblood of an eternal narrative that ensured the people didn't just comply, they believed. These myths weren't just bedtime stories. They were powerful tools of statecraft, reinforcing the pharaoh's divine mandate and the social order it upheld. In a land where literacy was a privilege of the few, oral traditions and religious rituals were the glue that held society together, giving the common folk a reason to endure the trials of life along the Nile. But let's not get too misty-eyed about these myths. While they provided comfort and structure, they also served to mask the harsh realities of pharaonic rule. The divine right was as much a political tool as it was a religious belief, a way to keep the population in line and the power dynamics intact. It was a grand illusion, a sleight of hand that turned the ordinary into the extraordinary, ensuring that the status quo was as immovable as the pyramids themselves. And so, as we pull back the curtain on ancient Egypt's social and political structures, we're left with a portrait that's as complex and multifaceted as the hieroglyphs that adorned its temples. It's a world where the flood wasn't just a natural event, but a cultural cornerstone, shaping everything from daily routines to the grand narratives of gods and kings. And while the myths may have presented a picture of harmony and divine favor, the reality was a relentless struggle against both nature and human ambition. As we stand at the edge of this historical saga, one thing becomes clear. The story of ancient Egypt is not just a tale of sand and stone, but a living, breathing narrative that continues to captivate and challenge us. So, as we prepare to dive into the next chapter of this epic journey, let's keep our eyes open and our minds curious, ready to uncover the truths that lie beneath the sands of time. Stay tuned, because the Nile story is far from over, and there's plenty more to explore in the land of the Pharaohs. So, as we stand at the edge of this historical saga, one thing becomes clear. The story of ancient Egypt is not just a tale of sand and stone, but a living, breathing narrative that continues to captivate and challenge us. And what a ride it's been. From the floodplains of the Nile to the halls of power in Thebes, we've journeyed through a civilization that mastered the art of turning a river's whim into a foundation of empire. But now, let's wrap this up with a bow by diving into the legacy those Nile floods left behind, both the highs and the lows. First, let's give credit where credit is due. Those ancient Egyptians were the original water whisperers. They understood that the Nile was more than just a river. It was the very pulse of their existence, a lifeline that demanded respect, ingenuity, and a touch of reverence. This wasn't just about surviving nature's tantrums. It was about thriving in spite of them. Their innovations in agriculture, from the shaduf to the basin irrigation, were like early prototypes of today's green technologies. And let's not forget those canals, the ancient highways of commerce and culture, which laid the groundwork for modern irrigation systems in a world where water scarcity is as pressing as climate change. And let's be honest, they're often two sides of the same coin. The lessons from Egypt's playbook are more relevant than ever. But as any good story goes, it wasn't all sunshine and lotus blossoms. The Nile's bounty was a double-edged sword, one that Egypt wielded with varying degrees of success. The very river that brought life also sowed the seeds of decline. You see, relying on a single resource to sustain an empire is a bit like putting all your papyrus scrolls in one basket. When the climate shifted, and those predictable floods became anything but the kingdom's grip on power loosened like the sands slipping through an hourglass. By the time the new kingdom rolled around 1550 BCE, those shifts weren't just whispers. They were full-blown conversations, and not the kind you enjoy over a nice cup of barley beer. The story of Egypt's decline is as layered as an onion, and not just because it might bring a tear to your eye. The floods became less reliable, leading to famines that made even the most stoic scribe reach for his reed pen in frustration. Social unrest brewed like a badly stored barrel of beer, and soon the mighty pharaohs found their divine mandate wasn't quite as ironclad as advertised. The late period, starting around 664 BCE, saw Egypt tossed around like a political football between foreign powers: Assyrians, Persians, and eventually the Greeks. Each wave of invaders brought their own flavor to the mix, but none could quite replicate the harmony that had once been struck with the Nile. Yet, for all its ups and downs, the legacy of Egypt's Nile management is far from washed away. Those ancient Egyptians taught us that managing natural resources isn't just about engineering. It's about understanding the delicate dance between humanity and nature. It's a lesson that modern society, with its dams and desalination plants, would do well to heed. Because if history has taught us anything, It's that Mother Nature has a way of reminding us who's really in charge. And speaking of reminders, let's take a moment to chuckle at what modern societies could learn from these ancient practices. Imagine, if you will, a world where taxes are paid not in mere numbers on a screen, but in tangible bushels of grain. Sure, it might make tax day a bit of a workout, but hey, at least you'd be prepared for the apocalypse with all that surplus wheat. Or consider the idea of measuring national success not by GDP, but by the height of a river's floodwaters. It would certainly make for a more exciting economic forecast. And who knows, maybe stockbrokers would swap their suits for sandals and take up stargazing. In all seriousness, though, the Egyptians' ability to adapt, innovate, and thrive in a world of uncertainties remains one of their most enduring legacies. It's a story of resilience and resourcefulness, of embracing the ebb and flow of life with a mixture of reverence and realism. And as we navigate our own challenges in this modern age, perhaps there's a lesson in there for us too, that the key to thriving isn't about controlling nature, but about learning to dance with it. So, as our journey down the Nile comes to a close, let's take a moment to appreciate the echoes of ancient footsteps that still resonate in our world today. From the grains that fed an empire to the hieroglyphs that chronicled its triumphs and tribulations, Egypt's story is woven into the very fabric of human history. It's a testament to the ingenuity and spirit of a people who dared to dream big, even as they navigated the unpredictable tides of fate. And with that, dear listener, we've reached the end of our epic tale. But fear not, for history is an ever-flowing river, and there's always more to discover just around the bend. So keep your eyes open and your mind curious, because the past isn't just a land of dusty artifacts and forgotten stories. It's a living, breathing testament to the boundless potential of human imagination and endeavor. Now go forth, armed with newfound knowledge and perhaps a little more appreciation for the ancient world and its enduring legacy. May your own journey be as rich and rewarding as the tales we've uncovered today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop learning. The Byzantine Empire in its prime was like that friend who always had the best parties, the coolest clothes, and an uncanny ability to stir up drama at the drop of a hat. You know the type, the one everyone wanted to emulate, despite their quirks. Stretching across 3 continents and lasting over a millennium, it was a powerhouse of politics, economics, and culture, flexing its influence with the finesse of a modern-day social media mogul. But before we dive into how this empire laid the groundwork for what would eventually become Russian culture, let's paint a picture of its golden years. In the heart of this empire was Constantinople, the city that was to the medieval world what New York is today, a buzzing hive of activity, wealth, and yes, bureaucracy that could make a DMV line look like a thrill ride. Founded in 330 AD by Emperor Constantine I, this city was a strategic gem, nestled between Europe and Asia, and controlling the key trade routes between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Talk about curb appeal. The Byzantine Empire's political system was complex, to put it mildly. Imagine a giant game of chess, but instead of wooden pieces, you've got real people vying for power, and instead of a board, you've got the sprawling empire itself. The emperor was the kingpin, wielding authority over a vast network of provinces, each with its own governor. These governors were like that uncle who insists on running the family reunion his way, often bickering amongst themselves and occasionally plotting to nab the emperor's crown. And then there were the eunuchs. Yes, you heard that right, who frequently held significant sway behind the scenes, often serving as the emperor's closest advisors. They were the political insiders, the power brokers without the family baggage. Sounds like a reality TV show, right? Economically, the Byzantine Empire was as rich as Croesus, and they weren't shy about flaunting it. Gold solidi, the empire's currency, became the dollar of the medieval world, a standard of wealth and stability. With a GDP that would make modern nations green with envy, Byzantium was the trade central of the known world. It was a place where silk, spices, and other luxury goods flowed like wine at a Roman banquet. And let's not forget the taxes. Oh, the taxes. The Byzantines had a tax for everything, from land to trade, and they collected them with the enthusiasm of a hall monitor on a power trip. But this relentless taxation was what kept the empire's coffers full and its enemies at bay, funding armies, fortifying cities, and of course, financing those endless theological debates. Speaking of which, the Byzantines loved a good religious debate. If Twitter existed back then, you can bet they'd be trending daily. These theological spats weren't just about who had the best divine memes. They were serious business. The empire split hairs over doctrines with as much fervor as modern fans argue about the best Star Wars trilogy. Take the iconoclast controversy, for example. This 8th and 9th century debacle was all about whether religious images were cool with God. On one side, you had the iconoclasts, the party poopers who thought all religious art was a no-no, while the iconodules were the art aficionados who believed icons were an essential part of worship. These debates were not just about religion. They were about power and control, influencing who got to sit in the emperor's good graces. Yet despite their penchant for arguing, the Byzantines were also the cultural trendsetters of their time. Byzantine art and architecture were the medieval equivalent of viral content. Their churches, with their domes that seemed to defy gravity and mosaics that glittered like 1,000 Instagram filters, were the talk of the town. The Hagia Sophia, completed in 537 AD, was the crown jewel, a marvel of engineering and artistry that still leaves visitors awestruck. It's no wonder that neighboring cultures looked to Byzantium for inspiration, eager to mimic their architectural bling and artistic flair. As we zoom out from the bustling streets of Constantinople, it's clear why the Byzantine Empire was a beacon of influence. Its political acumen, economic might, and cultural panache made it the medieval equivalent of a global superstar. But like any celebrity, Byzantium had its share of admirers and detractors. Among those keeping a keen eye on this empire were the Slavs and the Rus, the early ancestors of what would become Russia. They were drawn to Byzantium's glittering allure and its promise of power and prosperity. Stay tuned, because this is where our story starts to intertwine, as the allure of Byzantium's golden years begins to cast its long shadow over the burgeoning Russian lands. The Rus, those early ancestors of the modern Russians, were like that scrappy underdog band trying to get a gig in a big city. Their gaze was fixed on Byzantium, the medieval equivalent of a superstar metropolis, and they were ready to hitch a ride on the empire's trade routes to fame and fortune. Enter the scene the Varangians, a Norse people who took to the rivers like ducks to water, establishing the trade routes that would serve as cultural and commercial lifelines between the Rus and the Byzantine Empire. Now, let's talk about these routes, because without them, the story of Byzantine influence on Russian culture would be like a rock concert without the amps. The Dnieper River was the main artery of this trade network, a watery highway stretching over 400 miles from the forests of modern-day Belarus to the Black Sea. And from there, just a hop, skip, and a sail away from Constantinople. Picture the Varangians rowing their longships down these rivers, the medieval equivalent of Amazon delivery trucks, but with more beards and less two-day shipping. These routes were the Silk Road of the North, and they were bustling with activity. Trade on these routes was a two-way street, quite literally. The Rus exported furs, honey, and slaves. Yes, slaves. While the romanticized image of the Rus often focuses on their fierce independence and warrior prowess, the reality was a bit more, shall we say, mercantile. It turns out, human trafficking was a lucrative business, and the Byzantines were willing customers. In return, the Rus imported luxury goods that Byzantium had in spades: silk, wine, spices, and those shiny coins that seemed to sing a siren song to the Rus leaders. And who could blame them? Byzantine coins were the closest thing to medieval bling, stamped with the emperor's face, and worth their weight in gold, literally. These interactions weren't just about tangible goods. With every fur pelt and amphora of wine, the Rus were also importing Byzantine cultural elements. It was like a crash course in Byzantine chic. The Rus leaders, ever the savvy networkers, were quick to recognize the benefits of aligning themselves with the Byzantine Empire's prestige. After all, nothing says, we've made it, quite like a diplomatic treaty with the world's most powerful empire. The first of these treaties, inked in 907 and again in 911, were negotiated by the legendary Rus leader Oleg. Now, Oleg was a guy who understood the power of a good spectacle. Legend has it that he once nailed his shield to the gates of Constantinople as a flex. Now, whether that actually happened or is just a bit of medieval myth-making is up for debate. These treaties were a big deal, like getting a backstage pass to the Byzantine cultural and economic scene. They established trade agreements, set rules for ruse merchants in Constantinople, and even included provisions for diplomatic immunity. Talk about VIP access. But it wasn't just about goods and treaties. The Byzantines, masters of both commerce and culture, were like the original influencers. Their religious and artistic ideas seeped into Ruse society, sowing the seeds for future cultural shifts. The Ruse, who were primarily pagan, started to encounter Byzantine Christianity in a big way. This was not an instant conversion, but more of a slow burn, a cultural flirtation that would eventually lead to a full-blown affair with Eastern Orthodoxy. For now, though, Ruse were content to dabble, drawn in by the grandeur of Byzantine ceremonial life and the promise of divine legitimacy that Christianity offered. And let's not forget the allure of Byzantine luxury goods. The silks were sumptuous, the spices intoxicating, and the jewelry. Oh, the jewelry. Byzantine craftsmen were unrivaled in their skill crafting pieces that would make any modern jeweler green with envy. For the Ruse, who were keen to showcase their newfound wealth and status, these items were more than just trinkets. They were symbols of power and prestige. Owning a piece of Byzantine luxury was like owning a slice of the empire's magic. Yet the reality behind this glittering facade was a bit more complicated. The trade routes that connected the Ruse and the Byzantines were fraught with danger. Raids by other tribes, treacherous rapids, and the ever-present threat of political intrigue made every journey a risky venture. The treaties helped mitigate some of these risks, but they were far from foolproof. In many ways, the Ruse were walking a tightrope between opportunity and peril, a balancing act that demanded both cunning and courage. As the 10th century wore on, the relationship between the Byzantines and the Ruse became increasingly entwined. The Ruse were no longer just traders at the empire's gates. They were becoming players on the Byzantine stage. Their leaders were eager students of Byzantine statecraft, learning the art of governance from the empire's seasoned politicians. They observed the Byzantine court's elaborate ceremonies and adopted its symbols of authority, all while maintaining their own distinct identity. The cultural exchange was not one way either. The Byzantines, for their part, were fascinated by the Ruse. These northern warriors, with their fierce reputations and exotic customs, captured the Byzantine imagination. Chroniclers like Constantine Porphyrogenitos wrote about them with a mix of admiration and bewilderment, noting their prowess in battle and their peculiar drinking habits. It was a mutual fascination, a blend of admiration and wariness that would shape the future of both cultures. In the grand tapestry of history, the initial interactions between the Byzantines and the Ruse were just the beginning of a long and complex relationship. The trade routes that linked their worlds were more than just paths of commerce. They were conduits of cultural transformation. The Byzantine bling may have dazzled the Ruse, but it was the deeper exchange of ideas and values that set the stage for the profound cultural shifts to come. As we leave this chapter open for continuation, it's clear that the story of Byzantine and Ruse interactions is far from over. The seeds of change have been planted, and the harvest is yet to come. Stay tuned for what happens next when the Ruse take a deeper plunge into the Byzantine way of life. As the Ruse found themselves increasingly entangled in the Byzantine web of influence, they were standing at the crossroads of cultural evolution. Enter Prince Vladimir, a ruler who was about to make a splash on the geopolitical stage, big enough to rival a cannonball dive at a pool party. Let's be real. Vladimir wasn't just looking for spiritual enlightenment when he flirted with Christianity. He was playing a high-stakes game of chess, and his decision to baptize his nation was a move straight out of the Byzantine playbook. Now, Prince Vladimir of Kiev, let's call him Vlad for short, wasn't your run-of-the-mill medieval ruler. He was a savvy politician, a bit of a playboy, and a guy who knew how to spot an opportunity when it sailed his way. Born around 958 AD, he was the grandson of the legendary Varangian chieftain Rurik, which means he had the kind of pedigree that made medieval genealogists swoon. By the time he seized power in 980 AD, he was already adept at the art of political maneuvering and consolidation. So why did Vlad decide to take the plunge into the baptismal font? Let's strip away the romanticized notion of a divine epiphany and look at the cold, hard facts. By aligning himself with Byzantium through Christianity, Vlad wasn't just seeking salvation. He was securing an insurance policy for his reign. Adopting Christianity offered him a way to centralize authority, unify his eclectic dominion, and gain the much-coveted legitimacy that only a connection to the prestigious Byzantine Empire could provide. It was the medieval equivalent of getting a blue checkmark on social media. In 988 AD, Vladimir took the plunge, literally, and got baptized, bringing his entire realm along for the ride. The mass conversion of the Rus wasn't exactly a gentle nudge toward the celestial. It was more like a brisk shove. Picture entire communities dunked into rivers en masse, with priests reciting the rites like they were working an assembly line. The Rus had been a pagan society, worshipping a pantheon of gods that would have made a Marvel comic blush. But Vladimir, the ultimate pragmatist, saw the writing on the wall and knew that embracing Christianity was the surest way to stabilize his rule and cozy up to Constantinople. Vlad's baptism wasn't just a personal decision. It was a geopolitical masterstroke. By marrying Anna, the Byzantine emperor's sister, he cemented his dynasty's ties to the empire. This union was a diplomatic coup akin to marrying into European royalty today. It gave Vladimir access to Byzantine expertise in governance, military strategy, and you guessed it, ecclesiastical matters. The transformation of Kievan Rus into a Christian kingdom wasn't just about faith. It was about power and the promise of a stable, unified state that commanded respect on the international stage. This newfound religious allegiance also opened the floodgates for a wave of Byzantine cultural imports. Suddenly, the Rus were adopting architectural styles straight out of Constantinople's playbook. The gold-domed churches and intricate mosaics that began to pepper the landscape were more than just places of worship. They were symbols of power and authority. The Church of the Tithes, commissioned by Vladimir himself in Kiev, was a monument to this new era. Built with Byzantine architectural influence, it was a statement of wealth and piety, a message to both his subjects and his enemies that Kievan Rus was stepping onto the world stage with serious swagger. Art, too, was undergoing a transformation. Byzantine iconography spilled into Rus lands like a tidal wave of color and religious fervor. Icons, those revered images of saints and holy figures, became a staple of religious life. They were not just artistic expressions. They were tools of devotion, believed to offer a direct line to the divine. The Rus, with their penchant for storytelling and oral tradition, found in these icons a new medium to express their burgeoning Christian identity. It was as if the entire cultural fabric of Kievan Rus was being rewoven with threads of Byzantine gold. But let's not get too swept away by the glittering mosaics and golden domes. The reality of this cultural shift was less a seamless transition and more a bumpy ride. The Rus were still grappling with the remnants of their pagan past, and the introduction of Christianity wasn't exactly a magic wand that erased old customs overnight. Tensions simmered as traditional beliefs clashed with the new Christian doctrine. Pagan temples were torn down, often replaced by churches, in a campaign that was as much about political control as it was about spiritual guidance. Amidst this upheaval, the Rus were also learning the Byzantine art of bureaucracy, a system so labyrinthine it could make even the most seasoned civil servant weep. The Byzantine influence on governance meant that Kievan Rus was starting to implement more structured administrative systems. This was a shift from the loosely organized tribal confederation that had characterized the region, moving toward a more centralized and hierarchical society. The Byzantine model provided a template for statecraft that would help strengthen Vladimir's hold on power and lay the groundwork for future expansion. Economically, the adoption of Christianity also had its perks. By aligning with Byzantium, the Rus gained access to broader trade networks and a more favorable position in the Byzantine economic sphere. This wasn't just about spiritual riches. It was about cold, hard cash. The Byzantine economy was still the medieval gold standard, quite literally, and being part of that circle meant the Rus could benefit from increased trade, better diplomatic relations, and a currency that carried weight across borders. Yet, the allure of Byzantine culture was not without its complications. The Rus, in their quest to emulate Byzantine sophistication, also found themselves wrestling with the empire's more unsavory aspects, including political intrigue and religious power struggles. The Byzantine court was notorious for its backroom dealings, and Byzantine politics was a game of thrones long before George R. Martin penned his epic. Vladimir and his successors would have to navigate these treacherous waters carefully, balancing their ambitions with the ever-present threat of Byzantine manipulation. In the end, Vladimir's baptism and the Christianization of Kievan Rus were turning points that set the stage for centuries of cultural and political development. The Rus were no longer just fringe players watching the Byzantine spectacle from the sidelines. They were stepping into the spotlight, ready to play their part on the medieval world stage. The seeds of change had been sown, and as Kievan Rus continued to evolve, the influence of Byzantium would remain a guiding light, casting its long shadow over the nascent Russian state. But don't think for a moment that this is where the story wraps up. The ripples of Vladimir's decisions would continue to spread, shaping the future of the Rus and their relationship with Byzantium in ways that would echo through the ages. So, hang tight, because the saga of Byzantine influence on Russian culture is far from over, and what comes next promises to be just as captivating. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the intricate dance between these two great civilizations, a tale of power, politics, and cultural transformation that's just getting started. With the foundations of Kievan Rus firmly planted in Byzantine soil, it was time to see how these seeds of influence would sprout into the realm of governance. If you thought Vladimir's baptism was a splash, wait until you see the political ripple effects. The Byzantine Empire wasn't just a cultural influencer, it was the medieval Pinterest for statecraft. Its governance style was like a fashionable outfit everyone wanted to try on, even if it meant adjusting a few seams. So, let's peel back the layers of Byzantine-inspired political couture that reshaped the Rus state. The Byzantine model was a complex tapestry, woven with threads of imperial grandeur and intricate bureaucracy. Imagine trying to follow a recipe with 1,000 steps, tedious, but worth the effort if you wanted the imperial cake to rise just right. At the heart of this administration was the emperor, a figure both revered and feared, much like a CEO with absolute power and a penchant for dramatic entrances. Now, when Vladimir and his successors looked to Byzantium, they weren't just admiring the emperor's wardrobe, they were eyeing the whole ensemble of administration. The Rus began to experiment with a more centralized government, drawing lessons from Constantinople's playbook. This transition was akin to moving from a family-run business to a corporate enterprise. The idea was to create a unified state that could command loyalty and order, ensuring that everyone from Novgorod to Kiev sang from the same hymn sheet, or at least tried to. Byzantine influence also trickled down into legal frameworks. The concept of codified laws, a Byzantine specialty, was a novel idea for the Rus. Enter the Russkaya Pravda, a legal code that was part justice system, part medieval self-help guide. This was a step beyond the earlier tribal customary laws, which were as predictable as a coin flip. The Russkaya Pravda was like the Byzantine legal system's younger, scrappier sibling, aiming to bring order to the chaos with a touch of Slavic flair. It tackled everything from property disputes to criminal offenses with a seriousness that suggested the Rus were done with the days of eye for an eye justice. At least on paper. The Byzantine notion of bureaucracy was another import that found fertile ground in Kievan Rus. The empire's civil service was a well-oiled machine, albeit one that sometimes leaked oil in the form of corruption and intrigue. The Rus, eager to replicate this efficiency, began to develop a more structured administrative apparatus. Think of it as upgrading from a paper map to GPS navigation. Sure, there were still wrong turns, but at least they had a route to follow. This wasn't just about copying a system. It was about maintaining control. The Byzantine model offered a blueprint for managing vast territories with a myriad of peoples, languages, and customs. For the Rus, who were dealing with a similarly diverse population, this was a godsend, or more appropriately, a gift from the Byzantine divine. The emphasis was on delegating authority to local governors or parsadniks who could enforce the central policies while keeping a lid on any rebellious tendencies. It was a balancing act, like spinning plates on sticks, ensuring that no region strayed too far from the central authority's gaze. But let's not sugarcoat it. This embrace of Byzantine bureaucracy wasn't all smooth sailing. The reality was a clash between the old ways and new rules. The Rus had to grapple with the complexities of a more hierarchical society, and not everyone was thrilled about it. Local chieftains, who were used to calling their own shots, found themselves increasingly beholden to the central power. This shift was like convincing a group of solo artists to join a band. Some took to it like rock stars, while others struggled with the loss of creative control. The Byzantine influence also extended to military organization. The empire's army was renowned for its discipline and strategic prowess, qualities the Rus were eager to adopt. Their forces, once a loose confederation of warriors, began to resemble a more professional army, with a focus on organization and chain of command. Think of it as upgrading from a rowdy militia to a sleek military unit, complete with Byzantine-style uniforms that wouldn't look out of place on a modern catwalk. This militaristic makeover was crucial for maintaining internal stability and projecting power outward, especially when dealing with pesky neighbors who didn't get the memo about playing nice. On the economic front, the Byzantine model offered lessons in taxation and trade regulation. The Byzantines were masters at squeezing revenue from every conceivable source, a talent that didn't go unnoticed by the Rus. Inspired by Constantinople's knack for filling its coffers, the Rus began to refine their own tax systems, ensuring a steady flow of wealth into the state treasury. This wasn't just about lining pockets. It was about funding the machinery of government and ensuring the lights, metaphorically speaking, stayed on. Yet, amidst these transformations, the Rus were careful not to lose their own identity. They were adopting Byzantine practices, but they weren't about to become a carbon copy of the empire. It was more like adding Byzantine spices to a Slavic stew, creating a unique flavor that was distinctly Rus. This cultural and political synthesis was a testament to their adaptability, allowing them to navigate the challenges of governance while maintaining a sense of self. As the Rus continued to absorb, adapt, and innovate, the influence of Byzantium remained a guiding star. The Byzantine blueprint provided a framework for governance that would shape the Rus' political landscape for generations to come. But this was just one chapter in a story that was still unfolding, a tale of cultural exchange and political evolution that was as dynamic as the rivers that connected their worlds. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine influence was far from a one-time event. The legacy of this grand empire would continue to reverberate through the halls of Russian power, shaping its future in ways both seen and unseen. The Byzantine allure was as irresistible as ever, and the Rus were just getting started on their journey of transformation. There's more to come as we explore how these Byzantine ideals continue to shape the burgeoning Russian state, creating a legacy that would last well beyond the fall of Constantinople itself. As the Byzantine influence continued to weave its intricate patterns into the fabric of Russian culture, it was clear that the Rus were more than mere imitators. They were cultural alchemists, turning Byzantine gold into something uniquely their own. But let's dive into the nitty-gritty of this transformation, where language, religion, and the arts played starring roles. First up, language. The Rus, in their quest to emulate the Byzantine elite, embraced the Cyrillic script, a creation attributed to Saints Cyril and Methodius, those enterprising brothers who were the medieval equivalent of tech startup founders. Introduced around the 9th century, this script was more than just a set of squiggles. It was a gateway to literacy and administrative efficiency. It allowed the Rus to document laws, religious texts, and trade agreements with a sophistication that would make any scribe blush. And let's not forget the practical aspect. Administering a vast territory without a standardized script would be like trying to run a business with post-it notes instead of emails. But Cyrillic wasn't just about communication. It was a cultural statement. By adopting it, the Rus were planting their flag in the Byzantine cultural sphere, signaling their ambition to be seen as equals on the medieval stage. This move was the equivalent of learning the language of the influencers to join the upper echelons of their social circle. It was a savvy blend of admiration and ambition, with a sprinkle of pragmatism. Then there's the liturgical overhaul. The adoption of Eastern Orthodox Christianity didn't just change the spiritual landscape, it revolutionized the liturgical one. The ruse embraced Byzantine rites with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store, albeit one that came with a hefty dose of incense and chanting. Byzantine liturgy was a sensory experience, rich in symbolism, steeped in tradition, and frankly, a bit overwhelming to the uninitiated. But for the ruse, it was the perfect tool for reinforcing the authority of the church and the state, binding the two in a symbiotic relationship that would last for centuries. The reality, however, was far from the romanticized image of a unified spiritual awakening. The ruse faced the challenge of integrating these complex rituals into a society that was still grappling with its pagan roots. It was like introducing a gourmet menu to a population used to fast food. Some took to it, others resisted, and a few just wanted their old favorites back. This tension was a testament to the cultural push and pull that defined the era, with the church acting as both a unifying force and a catalyst for change. Art, too, was swept up in this Byzantine tsunami. The ruse, ever the astute observers, began to emulate Byzantine icons and mosaics with zeal. These weren't just pretty pictures. They were theological statements, windows to the divine that conveyed a complex spiritual narrative. The production of icons became a cottage industry, with workshops springing up to meet the growing demand. It was an artistic boom that would rival the Renaissance centuries later, albeit with more halos and less nudity. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't just about piety. The ruse saw the prestige associated with Byzantine art and wanted a piece of the action. Owning an icon was like having a piece of the empire's divine blessing, a spiritual insurance policy that also happened to look great on your wall. For the burgeoning Russian elite, this was a way to signal their status and sophistication, much like modern art collectors flaunting their Picassos and Warhols. The architectural scene was another canvas for this cultural interplay. Byzantine influence was as apparent as ever, with the construction of grand churches echoing the architectural prowess of Constantinople. The Church of the Tithes in Kiev was a prime example, a basilica that was more than just a place of worship. It was a statement of power, a declaration of Kievan Ru's newfound status as a player on the world stage. These structures were built to inspire awe, to convey the message that the Rus were here to stay, with a foundation as solid as the stones they were built from. Yet, with all this Byzantine bling, the Rus never lost their own cultural identity. They were masters at picking and choosing, integrating Byzantine elements with their own traditions to create something entirely new. This cultural osmosis was a testament to their adaptability, a survival mechanism that allowed them to thrive in a world where power dynamics were as fluid as the Dnieper River. Behind the gilded icons and incense-laden rituals, however, lay a more pragmatic reality. The Rus were adept at navigating the Byzantine power plays, using their alliance with the empire to bolster their own political ambitions. This wasn't just a cultural exchange. It was a strategic partnership, with both sides keenly aware of the benefits and pitfalls. The Rus were no strangers to the Byzantine Game of Thrones, and they played it with a cunning that would make any courtier proud. As we draw the curtain on this chapter, it's clear that the legacy of Byzantine influence on Russian culture is as complex as it is enduring. The Rus didn't just borrow from Byzantium. They transformed it, integrating its elements into their own cultural tapestry in a way that was both innovative and strategic. This was more than a tale of admiration. It was a saga of ambition, a testament to the power of cultural transformation. In the end, the story of Byzantine influence on Russian culture is a reminder of the enduring power of cultural exchange. It's a tale of two civilizations, each with its own strengths and weaknesses, coming together to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The Byzantine legacy in Russia is a testament to the enduring allure of cultural osmosis, a blend of admiration and ambition that continues to shape the world we live in today. So, as you drift off to sleep, let the echoes of Byzantine chants and the shimmer of golden mosaics guide your dreams. Remember, history isn't just a series of dates and events. It's a living, breathing tapestry of human ambition and creativity. And in the case of the Byzantines and the Rus, it's a story that continues to inspire, a legacy that endures across time and space. Sweet dreams, and may your historical curiosity never wane. Leonardo da Vinci's story kicks off in a place that sounds as quaint as a vintage postcard. Vinci, Italy, a town so small it might fit inside one of its own olive groves. Born in 1452, Leonardo arrived in this world with a bit of a social hiccup. He was illegitimate. His father, Sir Piero, was a notary, and his mother, Caterina, a peasant woman. In the 15th century, being born out of wedlock could have been a ticket to Nowheresville, but not for Leonardo. Instead, it put him on a path that was less about what school books would later call the Renaissance man, and more about a guy who couldn't stop poking his nose into everything. Now, being a kid in Vinci wasn't all bad news. Sure, he wasn't destined for a cushy spot in the family business, but that gave him the freedom to wander. And wander he did, through the hills and valleys of Tuscany, where he developed an eye for nature that was sharper than a hawk's. It's said that he'd spend hours just watching water swirl or leaves rustle, like a kid who accidentally discovered Netflix for the first time. This might sound like an idyllic childhood, but here's the kicker. Leonardo's illegitimacy meant he couldn't go to one of those fancy Latin schools. Instead, he got his education on the fly, absorbing knowledge like a sponge in a library. And that's where his story starts to get juicy. Without the constraints of formal schooling, Leonardo's education was more of a DIY project. He was the kind of guy who would draw a bird just to figure out how it flew. His notebooks, which looked like the scribblings of a mad genius, were filled with mirror writing and sketches that seemed to be doodles, until you realized they were blueprints for inventions centuries ahead of their time. This insatiable curiosity was his real school, where subjects ranged from anatomy to hydraulics, all self-taught. But before you think Leonardo waltzed into greatness without a hitch, let's talk about his time in Florence, where he landed an apprenticeship with Andrea del Verrocchio. Now, Verrocchio wasn't just any artist. He was a big deal in the art world of Florence. This was the Renaissance equivalent of scoring an internship with Steve Jobs. But don't picture Leonardo immediately being handed a paintbrush and a canvas. Nope, think less master in training and more art world intern, tasked with grinding pigments and cleaning brushes. Glamorous? Hardly. Essential? Absolutely. For Leonardo, this was boot camp for artists. Under Verrocchio, he learned how to mix paints, sculpt, and even work with metals. It was the gritty, unglamorous work that laid the foundation for his future masterpieces. Here's a fun tidbit. There's a legend that when Leonardo painted an angel in one of Verrocchio's works, the master was so blown away by his apprentice's skill that he swore off painting forever. While it makes for a good story, the reality is likely more mundane. Verrocchio continued to paint, but Leonardo's talents certainly didn't go unnoticed. Despite the romantic image of the Renaissance man, Leonardo's early life was a grind of trial and error. But it's this constant questioning, this refusal to accept the world at face value, that set him apart. He was a keen observer, not just of the world around him, but of the mechanics behind it. This was a guy who didn't just look at the stars. He wanted to measure them, map them, and understand their movements. His notebooks are filled with sketches of machines that wouldn't be built for hundreds of years, from helicopters to tanks. So, what's the takeaway here? Leonardo wasn't just a product of his time. He was a rebel against it. He wasn't content with the status quo, and his illegitimacy may have been the best thing that ever happened to him. It freed him from the constraints of formal education and allowed his curiosity to run wild. In a world that was just beginning to rediscover the value of questioning, Leonardo was the kid in the back of the class who wouldn't stop asking why. And while the myth of the Renaissance man paints him as a solitary genius, the truth is that he was a relentless learner, always in search of the next great idea. So, here's to the curious, the illegitimate, and the audacious. Leonardo da Vinci was all three, and that's what made him a legend. And so, Leonardo's lifelong obsession with the mechanics of the universe didn't just stop at stargazing. It spiraled into the realm of invention, where his imagination took flight, sometimes literally. His notebooks, filled with intricate sketches and notes, are the stuff of sci-fi legends. We're talking about a man who designed a helicopter before anyone even knew what that was. Now, was this early chopper made of titanium and powered by a turbine? Not quite. Think more along the lines of a giant spinning corkscrew made of reeds and linen. It might not have lifted off the ground, but it sure lifted minds. Leonardo's contraptions weren't just limited to flying machines. He dabbled in everything from scuba gear to war machines. Picture this, a massive armored vehicle, akin to a turtle on wheels, bristling with cannons. It's as if he predicted the tank centuries before it would roll onto a battlefield. But here's the kicker. These blueprints were often more visionary than viable. Leonardo's designs were, at times, a step ahead of the materials and technology available in the 15th century. It's like he was trying to build a smartphone in an era that was still trying to get a handle on the abacus. Now, let's put this genius in context. In the 15th century Italian landscape, Leonardo wasn't just doodling for kicks. Italy was a patchwork of city-states, each with its own ruler, and they were often at each other's throats. War was as common as pasta, and innovation in military technology was highly prized. Enter Leonardo, with his arsenal of ideas, hoping to turn sketches into reality. But turning these dreams into something tangible required more than just vision. It needed patrons with deep pockets. Enter the Medici and Sforza families, the Renaissance equivalent of venture capitalists. The Medici of Florence and the Sforza of Milan were the big players who could bankroll Leonardo's ambitious projects. It was all about quid pro quo. These powerful families provided the resources and political clout, and in return, they got a front-row seat to the wonder that was Leonardo's inventive mind. The Medici were like that cool uncle who funds your startup because he believes in your crazy idea, except their investments were in cannons and fortifications, not apps and gadgets. But let's not romanticize this patronage too much. The relationship was symbiotic, but it came with strings attached. Leonardo was expected to deliver results, or at least impressive concepts, to justify the investment. This economic and political landscape dictated much of what he could and could not do. And while the patrons were dazzled by visions of flying machines and impenetrable fortresses, the truth was less glamorous. Many of Leonardo's designs were impractical, some even defying the laws of physics as they were understood at the time. Take his infamous flying machine sketches, for example. Inspired by birds, his designs suggested a human-powered flight, but the physics were, let's say, optimistic. The muscle-powered wings might have looked elegant on paper, but in reality, they were more likely to get you a one-way ticket to a face-first crash landing. The myth of Leonardo as a successful inventor is intoxicating, but the reality is that many of his ideas were more fantasy than function. Still, let's not dismiss Leonardo as just a dreamer. His notebooks were a sandbox for experimentation, a place where he could push boundaries without the constraints of modern engineering limitations. And while not all his projects were successful, they were stepping stones for future inventors who could stand on the shoulders of his giant ideas. Leonardo was like the guy who shows up at a party with wild stories. Maybe not all of them are true, but they sure make the night memorable. In dissecting Leonardo's work, it's crucial to appreciate the spirit of his inventions, even if they never saw the light of day. His sketches were more than just blueprints. They were dialogues with the future. At the heart of his engineering endeavors was a relentless curiosity, a desire to understand and recreate the world around him. And while his contemporaries might have scoffed at some of his more outlandish ideas, Leonardo was laying the groundwork for a future where such dreams could take flight. So, what's the takeaway from Leonardo's adventures in engineering? He wasn't just an artist with a paintbrush. He was an artist with the universe. His inventions, though often unfeasible, were expressions of a mind that refused to be constrained by the present. Leonardo's life exemplified the tension between the ideal and the practical, the dreamer and the doer. In a world bound by the limitations of its time, Leonardo dared to imagine what could be, even if it meant occasionally falling flat, sometimes literally. In the bustling courts of Italy, where politics and power plays were as intricate as Leonardo's sketches, he thrived not just because of his talent, but because he navigated these waters with the finesse of a diplomat. His patrons might have funded his ventures for the prestige of having a genius in their midst, but it was Leonardo's ability to sell his vision that kept him afloat in this patronage system. And while the stories of his inventions are sprinkled with a fair bit of myth, they're also a testament to the human spirit's unyielding desire to transcend what's possible. Leonardo's story is far from over, and in the next part, we'll continue to unearth the layers of this enigmatic figure, whose legacy is as complex as the gears in his fantastic machines. Leonardo's story is like an onion, layered, pungent, and sometimes makes you cry when you realize the world took centuries to catch up with him. But let's turn the spotlight from his doodles of flying machines to his deeper dives into science, where his curiosity was as relentless as a toddler with a new word. Leonardo wasn't just sketching wild inventions. He was dissecting the mysteries of life itself, quite literally. Enter the world of anatomy, where Leonardo was less of a mad scientist and more of an inquisitive explorer. You see, back in the 15th century, if you wanted to understand the human body, you didn't consult a textbook. You went straight to the source. Morgues and hospitals became Leonardo's classrooms, and cadavers his study material. Now, this wasn't like sneaking into a midnight movie. Nope, it was a little more cloak and dagger. Imagine Leonardo in the dead of night, slipping into a morgue like a cat burglar, except instead of swiping jewels, he was after knowledge. These clandestine dissections were no small feat. At that time, dissection was a bit of a taboo, tangled up in religious and ethical debates. But Leonardo pushed past the whispers and the raised eyebrows, driven by a hunger to see what made humans tick, literally. Over the years, he dissected around 30 cadavers. That's 30 more than most folks would stomach, but for Leonardo, each was a step closer to unraveling the secrets of life. His anatomical sketches were groundbreaking, not just for their detail, but for their insight. He mapped the human body with the precision of a cartographer, capturing everything from sinews to the swirling labyrinth of the brain. These drawings weren't just pretty pictures for the gallery. They were scientific documents, centuries ahead of their time. Leonardo's notebooks showed muscles flexing, hearts beating, and even fetuses curled in wombs, images that wouldn't find their way into a medical manual for another 200 years. But let's throw a little shade on the myth of Leonardo as the unrivaled genius. Sure, his anatomical studies were stunning, but they didn't exactly revolutionize medicine overnight. His notes were like a treasure map that everyone ignored, gathering dust for centuries. Why, you ask? Well, for starters, they were written in his famous mirror script, which is as confounding as trying to read your reflection in a funhouse mirror. Plus, they weren't published during his lifetime. Without the viral power of the Renaissance equivalent of TikTok, his discoveries remained hidden, benefiting only those lucky enough to glimpse his secretive scribblings. Now, Leonardo wasn't just a one-note wonder. He dipped his toes into hydrodynamics too, studying the ebb and flow of water like a poet mesmerized by the sea. He watched rivers the way some people watch sunsets, captivated by their rhythm and power. His observations were meticulous, recording everything from the way water carved its path through rock to how it spiraled downwards in a whirlpool. Leonardo saw water as the blood of the earth, its movement a dance of life. He was fascinated by the idea of controlling water, dreaming up plans for canals, and even a scheme to divert the Arno River away from Pisa. This wasn't just an exercise in engineering bravado. It was strategic, an attempt to cripple a rival city-state by cutting off its trade routes. But much like his flying machines, these plans were a bit too ambitious for the technology of the day. The Arno project, unsurprisingly, remained in the realm of dreams. In contrast, let's talk about some contemporaries who managed to turn their theories into practical realities. Take Nikolaus Copernicus, who was busy repositioning the Earth in the cosmos. His heliocentric model was a mic drop moment in astronomy, challenging the status quo with a boldness that would make Galileo blush. And then there's Andreas Vesalius, whose anatomical works were published and widely circulated, laying the groundwork for modern medicine. While Leonardo was sketching in secret, Vesalius was turning the scientific world on its head. Yet, it's unfair to measure Leonardo's genius by the yardstick of immediate success. His work wasn't about the here and now. It was a whisper to the future. He was a man out of step with his time, drawing maps for journeys that the world wasn't ready to take. His notebooks, filled with mirrored musings and sketches that seemed plucked from a fever dream, were his dialogue with posterity. Leonardo's scientific pursuits underscore a broader truth about human nature. We're driven by a desire to understand, to decode the universe, even if our efforts sometimes land us in the realm of fantasy. He wasn't just a man of his era. He was a bridge between the known world and the world waiting to be discovered. Leonardo's genius wasn't just his ability to imagine what could be. It was his refusal to accept what was. In a world that was content to stay put, Leonardo was already packing his bags for the next adventure. As we dig deeper into his scientific endeavors, remember that Leonardo's story is far from finished. His notes and sketches may have been forgotten in his time, but they've since become a testament to the power of curiosity. They remind us that the journey of discovery is as important as the destination, and that sometimes those who wander off the beaten path end up creating roads for others to follow. So, here's to the dreamers and the doers, the ones who see the world not just as it is, but as it could be. Leonardo was both, and his legacy is a reminder that the future is built on the audacity of imagination. And just when you thought Leonardo had plumbed the depths of human curiosity, he turned his gaze to the cityscapes around him. Picture him wandering the bustling streets of Milan, eyes wide with both awe and a critical eye for the chaos of Renaissance urban life. Leonardo wasn't just content with sketching the anatomy of humans. He wanted to dissect the anatomy of cities themselves. Welcome to the urban planning section of Leonardo's life, a masterclass in what could have been. Now, if you're picturing Leonardo as a 15th century city planner, clipboard in hand, think again. Urban planning back then wasn't the slick operation it is today. Cities were more of a hodgepodge of winding streets, cramped quarters, and to put it delicately, a sanitation system that left much to be desired. Let's be real, living next to a medieval open sewer wasn't anyone's idea of a dream home. Enter Leonardo, who with his usual flair for the audacious, imagined cities that functioned like clockwork. His designs were nothing short of revolutionary, with multi-tiered streets that separated the noble carriages from the pedestrian rabble below. The idea was as practical as it was idealistic. You see, Leonardo envisioned a city where the rich didn't have to rub elbows with the riffraff, all while improving sanitation by keeping waste out of the streets. Think of it as an early attempt at urban zoning, only with a lot more style and a lot less bureaucracy. Leonardo's sketches included plans for wide boulevards and canals, which would allow for better airflow and water management. Remember, this was a time when the plague wasn't just a horror story. It was a recurring nightmare. The idea of designing a city to combat disease was revolutionary. His plans even included details like centralized marketplaces and public parks, concepts that wouldn't become commonplace until centuries later. It's like he was trying to build a utopia in a world that was still figuring out how to not throw garbage out the window. But while Leonardo's city designs were visionary, they were also a little too ambitious for the era's technology and resources. The cost of implementing such sweeping changes would have been astronomical, and let's not forget the political quagmire. Most city rulers weren't keen on tearing down their cities to build Leonardo's dreamscape, no matter how appealing it sounded. His vision remained mostly on paper, a tantalizing glimpse of what cities could be if only they weren't bound by the grime and grit of reality. Speaking of grit, let's shift to Leonardo's time in Milan, where he was more than just a passing guest. His stint with Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, was a period where Leonardo's talents were both nurtured and tested. The Duke wasn't just interested in pretty pictures. He wanted fortresses, canals, and maybe a little prestige from having the Renaissance's rock star in his court. Leonardo, ever the diplomat, delivered with projects like the massive equestrian statue, which, spoiler alert, was never completed. The bronze earmarked for it, diverted to make cannons. Ah, the eternal struggle between art and war. Now, Milan was a hotbed of political intrigue, and Leonardo had to navigate these waters like a veteran sailor. The city was a patchwork of power plays and shifting allegiances. The patronage of Sforza was crucial, but it came with the pressure to constantly prove his worth. Leonardo was a man of many talents, but even he couldn't juggle politics, art, and science without dropping a few balls. His later years in Rome were no less complicated. The Eternal City was a magnet for artists and thinkers, but it was also a cauldron of rivalry and competition. Leonardo, now older and perhaps a bit more world-weary, found himself at odds with fellow artists like Michelangelo. Picture two titans of art in the same city, each with their own loyal followers, and you've got yourself a Renaissance soap opera. Michelangelo was the young hotshot, while Leonardo was the seasoned maestro, and their rivalry was the stuff of legend. This political and artistic rivalry underscored the harsh reality that Leonardo's life wasn't a series of uninterrupted triumphs. While he was a master of many trades, he was also a master of leaving things unfinished. The equestrian statue in Milan wasn't his only incomplete project. His notebooks were filled with designs for inventions and works of art that never saw the light of day. It's tempting to view these as failures, but they also speak to the relentless pursuit of new ideas that defined Leonardo's life. So, what's the real story behind Leonardo's urban visions and his time in Milan and Rome? It's a tale of dreams colliding with reality, of a man who dared to imagine cities that were more than just places to live. They were meant to be symphonies of function and beauty. His architectural ideas might have been too grand for the time, but they were a blueprint for future generations. And while Leonardo's life was punctuated by unfinished projects and rivalries, it was also a testament to the power of vision, even when the world isn't quite ready for it. In the end, Leonardo was more than the sum of his successes and failures. He was a man who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be, and that's a legacy that no unfinished statue can overshadow. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that Leonardo's story is far from over. There's still more to uncover about this enigmatic figure who was as much a part of his time as he was a rebel against it. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. As we wrap up our deep dive into the twists and turns of Leonardo da Vinci's life, it's time to pack our bags and head to France, where the final chapters of his story unfold. Leonardo, ever the Renaissance rock star, was beckoned to the court of King Francis in 1516. At the ripe age of 64, he wasn't exactly the spry young polymath who had once dazzled Florence and Milan, but he still had a few tricks up his sleeve. Imagine the European equivalent of a late career transfer to a top-tier club, where the player is past his prime, but still brings unmatched prestige and wisdom to the team. Francis I, a king with a taste for the arts and an eye for genius, offered Leonardo a cushy gig complete with a manor house, a generous pension, and the title of premier painter and engineer and architect to the king. Talk about a Renaissance trifecta. Leonardo took up residence in Clos-Lucé, a charming manor just a stone's throw from the royal Shadow Dambois. With the French king as his new patron, Leonardo found himself in a nurturing environment, free from the political intrigue and rivalries that had dogged him back in Italy. But let's not romanticize this royal retirement too much. Leonardo was no longer the prolific creator he once was. His health was in decline, and a paralyzing stroke left his right hand largely useless. Despite this, he spent his final years tinkering with old projects, mentoring young artists, and discussing the mysteries of the cosmos with Francis I, who reportedly treated Leonardo like a beloved uncle. The king's fondness for Leonardo might have been a bit over the top, considering he allegedly referred to him as the father of all artists. High praise indeed, though I suspect some artistic contemporaries might have rolled their eyes at that one. As Leonardo's life ebbed away, he continued to sketch and theorize, leaving behind a treasure trove of notebooks filled with musings and designs that would inspire generations. He passed away on May 2, 1519, at the age of 67, in what could only be described as a quiet yet profoundly impactful exit. The legend goes that Francis I cradled Leonardo's head as he died, a scene so heartwarming and cinematic, it practically begs for a slow-motion replay. But let's not get carried away. This tale, like many others about Leonardo, is likely more poetic than factual, a testament to the enduring allure of the Leonardo myth. Now, here's where things get interesting. Despite his revered status today, Leonardo's contemporaries viewed him as something of an enigma. He was known more for his unfinished works than his completed masterpieces, and his reputation was a cocktail of genius and unpredictability. While his paintings like The Last Supper and Mona Lisa were celebrated, they were also criticized for their unconventional techniques and the constant threat of deterioration. Leonardo was a man of contrasts, a visionary who could see the future but often struggled to finish in the present. Fast forward a few centuries, and Leonardo's posthumous fame skyrocketed. His notebooks, once neglected, became the holy grail for art historians and engineers alike. The man who had lived with more than a few critics and skeptics was now hailed as the quintessential Renaissance genius, his legend growing with each passing generation. But why the change? How did Leonardo go from being a mildly successful artist-engineer to the poster child for polymaths everywhere? The answer lies partly in the romanticism of history. Leonardo's life has all the elements of a great story, enigmatic genius, unfinished works, and the allure of a mind that seemed to grasp the universe itself. The Leonardo myth is a heady brew of fact and fiction, where tales of his brilliance often overshadow the very real, flawed human being he was. It's a narrative that feeds on our desire for larger-than-life figures, those who transcend their time and circumstances to become immortal in our collective imagination. But let's peel back the layers of this myth. Was Leonardo truly the solitary genius we've come to idolize? Or was he, like all of us, a product of his environment, shaped by the patrons who funded him and the rivals who challenged him? While it's tempting to cast him as a lone pioneer, the reality is that Leonardo was deeply embedded in the vibrant, competitive world of Renaissance Italy. He was an artist who needed patrons, a thinker who thrived on the intellectual currents of his time, and a man who, despite his genius, couldn't always escape the limitations of his era. In examining Leonardo's legacy, we're reminded of the complex interplay between romance and reality. His life was a testament to the power of curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge, even when success wasn't guaranteed. Leonardo's notebooks, filled with sketches of inventions that never took flight and studies of human anatomy that remained unpublished, are emblematic of a mind that refused to be boxed in. It's easy to get swept up in the myth, to envision Leonardo as the ultimate Renaissance superhero. But let's not forget the human behind the legend, the restless soul who saw the world as a puzzle to be solved, a canvas to be painted with dreams. His legacy isn't just about the masterpieces he left behind. It's about the spirit of inquiry and imagination that continues to inspire us today. So, as we conclude our journey through the life of Leonardo da Vinci, let's toast to the dreamers and the doers, the ones who see beyond the confines of their time and dare to imagine what could be. Leonardo's life was a symphony of contradictions, a blend of triumphs and unfinished symphonies. In his story, we find a reflection of our own quest for understanding, a reminder that the journey is often as important as the destination. And there you have it, the life and legacy of Leonardo da Vinci, a tale as layered and intriguing as the man himself. While the myths may sometimes overshadow the reality, they also serve to keep his spirit alive, a beacon of creativity and curiosity that continues to light the way for future generations. So, here's to Leonardo, the artist, the thinker, the eternal wanderer. May his story inspire us to look beyond the horizon and imagine the world not just as it is, but as it could be.